Before you lose yourself in this story, do me one favor, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because this one doesn't let go. The fire didn't care what it burned. That was the thing about fire, it consumed deeds the same way it consumed kindling, turned bank certificates to ash, with the same indifference it showed to newspaper and pine bark. The woman feeding documents into the kitchen stove did not cry. Her hands did not shake. She worked with the methodical calm of someone who had already done the hardest part, who had already made the decision, and was now simply executing it the way you would execute any task that needed to be finished before morning came. Outside, Red Hollow slept. The saloons had gone quiet an hour ago. The miners were in their beds. Snow had begun to fall, soft and purposeless, drifting past the window in slow spirals that caught the light from the stove and disappeared into the dark. She fed another deed into the fire. Then another, each one worth more than this entire town would earn in a decade. Each one a piece of the empire her father had built, silver mines, and rail contracts and land grants that stretched from here to the horizon and beyond. Wealth so vast, it had a weight to it, a gravity that pulled everything and everyone into its orbit, whether they wanted to be there or not. She was done being pulled. When the last page curled and blackened and fell into nothing, she sat back on her heels and watched the coals settle. She was not free. She understood that now. You did not become free by burning paper, but she was lighter, and tonight that was enough. Her name, her real name, was Clara Hale, and this is the story of what she chose instead. 6 months earlier, the train from Denver had been running 3 hours late, which meant Clara had spent 3 hours pressed against a window watching the Montana Territory unspool beneath a bleached summer sky, rehearsing the version of herself she was about to become. Her name was Nora Walsh. She had come from Missouri. Her family was gone fever, she would say, if anyone asked, and she would say it with the particular flatness of someone who had told that story enough times that it no longer hurt. She had some schooling enough to read and write well, but nothing fancy. She was looking for honest work. She did not have much money. The last part was almost true. She did not have much money on her person. What she had was a leather portfolio tucked inside her coat, pressed against her ribs, and the documents inside that portfolio represented a fortune so large that she had stopped being able to picture it as money years ago. It had ceased to be currency. It had become simply weight, obligation, the thing that made every room she entered a negotiation, every man who looked at her, a potential transaction, every choice she made a decision about the inheritance rather than about herself. Her father, James Hale, had built railroads. He had been brilliant and ruthless and occasionally kind, and he had loved Clara in the way that men like him loved things completely and possessively and without ever quite asking what the thing itself wanted. He had died 8 months ago, leaving her everything, and in the months between his death and her departure from Philadelphia, she had learned things about how that everything had been built that made it impossible to sit still in the mansion and smile and sign papers and pretend. But that was a longer story. She would get to it. The train lurched to a halt. Metal screamed. Steam billowed past the window in great white clouds, and through them, like something materializing from nothing, Red Hollow appeared. Clara had researched the town before choosing it. 3 years old, born from a silver strike, still growing. Far enough from the rail lines that Philadelphia money had not found it yet. Small enough that a woman alone would be noticed, but rough enough that people had learned not to ask too many questions about why someone was starting over. The frontier had always been a place for second chances, or at least that was what she had told herself on the long journey west. She straightened her dress. Simple blue cotton purchased in Denver, mended at one sleeve. Nothing like the silk and cashmere she had left behind. She gathered her single bag. Everything else had been sent ahead under a different name, and waited for the other passengers to clear before she stood. The heat hit her the moment she stepped onto the platform. Not the polite warmth of a Philadelphia summer, but something brutal and direct, a heat that seemed to come from the ground as much as the sky, pressing down and up simultaneously until the air between felt solid. The platform was rough-hewn wood, already warping in places. The few people waiting were dressed in clothes faded past their original colors, practical and worn. Clara looked at them and then down at herself. Close enough. Not quite right, but close enough. "You look lost." She turned. The woman was perhaps 40, with a face that had been pretty once and had become something better interesting, observant, marked by weather and work, and what looked like a great deal of careful thinking. She wore an apron over a calico dress and carried herself with the ease of someone who had long ago stopped wondering what other people thought of her. "I'm not lost," Clara said. "I'm arriving." The woman smiled. It was a small smile, and it did not reach her eyes, but it was not unkind. "Mei Lin, I run the boarding house on 2nd Street. She tilted her head. "You need a room." It was not a question. Clara filed that away. "I need work," Clara said. "And a room while I find it." "Work doing what?" "Anything honest. I can cook, clean, mend. I'm willing to learn." Mei Lin's eyes moved over her the way a good reader moves over a page, quickly, comprehensively, not missing anything. Clara felt the assessment happen and kept her face still. "You've got education," Mei Lin said. "I can hear it." "I had schooling, yes." "Where are you from?" "Missouri." The lie came smoothly. She had practiced it for 3 weeks. Mei Lin was quiet for a moment. Then, "You running from something?" "Starting over," Clara said. Which was true enough. Another pause. Longer this time. Mei Lin seemed to be conducting some internal calculation, the variables of which Clara could not see. "I could use help," she said finally. "Pay is 50 cents a day, plus room and board. Work starts before dawn and ends when it ends. Sundays you get the afternoon." "I'll take it. Don't you want to know more before you agree?" Clara thought of the leather portfolio against her ribs, of the Philadelphia mansion with its 40 rooms and its staff of 12, and its particular silence, the silence of a house that had once been full of her mother's voice, and was now full of nothing but obligation and expectation, and the memory of a woman 3 years dead. "No," she said. "I just want to start." Mei Lin studied her for one more moment. Then she picked up one of Clara's bags, just took it, without asking the way competent people do, and said, "Come on then, before you melt." The boarding house on 2nd Street had seen better decades. The paint on the siding had given up some time in the recent past, and was in the process of departing the wood in long, peeling strip. The porch sagged on the left side. One of the upstairs windows had been repaired with a piece of oilcloth rather than glass. Clara looked at it and felt something loosen in her chest. It was perfect. Not beautiful, not comfortable, not grand. Perfect in the specific sense that it was exactly the kind of place where Nora Walsh would live and work and become real. No one from Philadelphia would ever look for Eliza Hale. She had started thinking of her old self by her old name, the way you might think of someone who had died in a place like this. No one would look for her at all if she did her job right. "It's not much," Mei Lin said, watching her. "It's exactly what I need." Mei Lin's expression shifted slightly, not skepticism exactly, but a reassessment. Most women who come here looking for work, they see this place and they apologize for themselves. Say they hoped for something better. "I'm not most women," Clara said, and then caught herself. That was too much. Too pointed. "I mean, I'm not particular." But Mei Lin just nodded slowly, as if the first version had been more interesting, and led her inside. The interior was dim and cooler, smelling of wood smoke and soap and something baking. The front room held a mismatched collection of furniture chairs that had come from different places and never quite agreed with each other. A long table scarred by years of meals curtains in a blue that had been bright once. Through a doorway, Clara could see the kitchen where a young woman was fighting with a wood stove in a way that suggested the stove was winning. "Daisy," Mei Lin called. "Come meet your new co-worker." The young woman emerged. She was 19 or 20, with dark auburn hair escaping from a bun in approximately 7 directions and a smear of flour on one cheek. Her eyes were a light hazel, and her face was open and expressive in the way of people who had not yet learned to guard themselves, or perhaps had simply decided not to bother. "Thank God," Daisy said frankly. "Mrs. Lin, I swear these miners eat like they're trying to put food out of business." She looked at Clara. "Can you cook?" "I'm learning." "Perfect. You can learn on them. They'll eat anything. I once served biscuits that could have been used for construction, and nobody complained." Clara felt something she hadn't felt in months, the small surprising warmth of amusement. "I'm Nora," she said. "Nora Walsh." "Daisy Pruitt." Daisy shook her hand with the energy of someone who meant it. "You'll be in the back room. It's small, but it locks, which matters more than size out here." She glanced at Mei Lin. "Charlie Hobbs is still in his usual chair in the front room, by the way. I was very politely ignoring him until he left on his own. Tell him dinner is at 6, and if he's not gone by 5:30, I'll charge him for the chair." Mei Lin turned to Clara. "Charlie is harmless if kept at a distance. You'll learn which boarders need watching and which don't. Mary will show you the room." "Daisy," Clara said. "What?" "You said Mary just now." She had heard it clearly. Mei Lin paused. Something moved across her face, too quick to read. "I did, didn't I?" She said it to herself more than to Clara. "Old habit. Daisy will show you your room." Daisy's expression had changed too briefly, a tightening around the eyes there and gone. She turned briskly and headed down the hallway. "Come on then. I'll get you an apron before you ruin that dress." Clara followed, filing the exchange away. She was good at filing things. Her father had taught her that to notice, to retain, to understand that information was always worth more than it appeared. Later, much later, she would understand what the name Mary meant, and why it had slipped out, and what it cost. But that was not tonight. Tonight, she had a small locked room with a narrow bed and a window that opened to the alley behind the building, and it was hers. Not her father's, not the estate's, not anyone's, but hers. And she lay on the narrow mattress in the heat with the leather portfolio under her pillow and listened to Red Hollow settle into the sounds of night, and she did not feel free. But she felt possible. The next morning, Mei Lin knocked on her door at 4:30. "Breakfast won't cook itself, Miss Walsh." Clara got up. She had expected it to be difficult. She had prepared herself for difficult. What she had not prepared for was the specific quality of this difficulty, the way her soft hands burned on the heavy pots, the way the stove required a relationship rather than a command, the way everything took 3 times as long as it should, because her body simply did not know how to do any of it yet. Daisy was patient. Daisy was, Clara realized within the first hour, one of those people who are constitutionally incapable of explaining something only once she would repeat it. Demonstrate it. Explain it from a different angle, show it. And with her hands narrate herself doing it until the other person understood. Not out of condescension, out of a genuine belief that if someone did not understand, the explanation was at fault, not the person. "The stove is particular," Daisy said, adjusting the damper for the 3rd time. "It doesn't like being told what to do. You have to convince it. It's a stove. Everything has opinions." Daisy handed her a long-handled spoon. "Stir this not too fast. If you rush it, it scorches." The boarders came in for breakfast at 6, a loud, hungry stream of miners and ranch hands, and one traveling salesman who looked profoundly out of place, and ate with the desperate efficiency of a man who had learned that hot food did not wait. They barely looked at Clara. They shoveled eggs and bacon and biscuits down with the focused attention of men whose bodies had important work to do, and food was fuel. She had expected to feel reduced by this invisible merely functional. Instead, she felt something she could not immediately name. It was only later washing dishes beside Daisy in water that turned her hands first red and then numb that she identified it. Relief. No one was watching her. No one was measuring her. No one was calculating what she represented, or what she was worth, or how she might be useful. She was the woman who had served eggs. That was the beginning and end of it. "You're smiling," Daisy observed. "Am I?" "At the dishes, which is either a good sign or a worrying one, and I haven't decided which." Clara looked down at her red hands at the water going gray with soap. "I like the work," she said. "I didn't expect to." Daisy nodded, as if this made sense to her. "There's something about work that asks the same of everyone," she said. "Doesn't matter where you're from. Bacon burns for rich and poor alike." She paused. "Not that I'm saying anything about where you're from." "You're not wrong," Clara said carefully. Daisy looked at her sideways. There was something there, a quick glance, a reassessment, the same kind Mei Lin had done, but younger and less practiced. Then Daisy dried her hands on her apron and went to start the midday prep, and the moment passed. It would come back. Things always came back. The weeks built themselves into a shape. 5 o'clock rising. Fire started. Breakfast cooked and served and cleaned. Laundry on Tuesdays, which was the day Clara came closest to despair, the weight of wet sheets, the water hot enough to steam in the morning air, the mangle that required strength. She was only beginning to develop. Midday meal, afternoon cleaning, mending whatever Mei Lin needed. Evening meal, dishes again. Then the narrow room and the portfolio under the mattress, and the particular darkness of a Montana summer night, which was cooler than the days suggested possible. Her hands changed first. The softness burned away in the first 2 weeks, replaced by redness that gave way to callus. Then her arms, which had been decorative and were becoming functional, growing defined from the hauling and lifting and wringing. The softness around her middle and face, the softness of a life lived entirely indoors on horseback, in parks at tables set by other people, began to draw in. She moved differently. She stood differently. She was becoming someone. Nora Walsh took shape around her like a second skin, and some mornings, when she looked in the small mirror above the washstand, she found it harder to find Clara Hale's face beneath it. This was either encouraging or frightening, and on different days, it was both. She learned Red Hollow the way you learn a language first, the basic structures, then the idioms, then the silences that meant more than words. The miners who headed out before dawn and came back 12 hours later with the particular exhaustion of men whose bodies had been instruments. The saloons that went loud on Friday and Saturday nights, and quiet and ashamed on Sunday mornings. The general store run by a man named Peterson, who was fair with most people and dishonest with newcomers until they proved themselves residents. The church that doubled as a meeting hall and a school, and once during a particularly bad winter as an infirmary. She learned which boarders needed watching and which were harmless. She learned that the man Daisy called Big Pete enormous, bearded frightening to look at, would carry in extra firewood without being asked, and would not eat the last of anything if he thought someone else might want it. She learned that the traveling salesman's name was Gerald, and that he made the same joke every time he arrived, and laughed at it, with the weary dedication of a man who had nothing else. She learned slowly that she was happy. Not the happiness she had known in Philadelphia, the shallow glitter of parties and new dresses, and the momentary pleasure of something beautiful. This was something else. Quieter, more load-bearing. The satisfaction of tasks completed, of usefulness earned rather than inherited, of a place in a community that she had not bought or been born into, but had simply worked for, day by day, until it was hers. She did not let herself think too much about how it was built on a lie. That way lay paralysis. She thought about the next meal, the next washing, the next morning. She thought forward, and on Saturday evenings she thought about Jesse Calloway. She had met him on a Thursday in mid-September, which she would later mark as one of those unremarkable moments that only reveal their importance in retrospect. She had been sent to Peterson's store for supplies, 50 pounds of flour, a side of bacon coffee, and sugar, and was helping load the sacks into the borrowed wagon when someone shouted from down the street. A single word, urgent. "Run away!" She looked up. 2 horses panicked past reason, pulling an empty wagon down the main street at the kind of speed that made physics personal. The driver was gone, thrown clear somewhere behind the curve they had come around. The horses' eyes showed white. The broken harness swung and bounced, slapping their sides, which did not help. The wagon swayed and bucked over the rutted road, threatening to overturn at every rut. People scattered. Women grabbed children. Men flattened themselves against buildings. Peterson grabbed Clara's arm, but she had already turned to pull the supply bags clear of the wagon's path, and her arms were full, and she was directly in line with everything, and her feet had stopped working the way feet sometimes do when the body understands something that the mind has not yet processed. She saw it coming. She could track its trajectory exactly. She had time, a strange, stretched, useless time, to understand that she was about to be hurt, and no power on earth was going to prevent it. Then something hit her from the side, hard enough to lift her off the ground. She was rolling before she understood she was falling, and strong arms were around her, taking the impact, turning so that a body was between her and the ground when they finally stopped. She ended up against the wall of the hardware store, breathing in short gasps with her face pressed against a man's chest. The wagon thundered past. It hit the water trough at the end of the street with a crash that seemed to shake the building behind them. Then silence. Then the sound of people beginning to breathe and talk again. The arms around her loosened. She sat back and looked at the man who had just thrown himself at a runaway wagon on her behalf. He was tall, over 6 feet, with the kind of build that came from actual labor rather than any deliberate effort, broad through the shoulders and narrow through the waist. His face was weathered in a way that was hard to age precisely, somewhere between 25 and 35. Brown from the sun, with dark hair that needed cutting, and a jaw that was in desperate need of a razor. He had lost his hat in the rescue, and it lay several feet away in the dust. But it was his eyes that she noticed. They were gray, not blue-gray or green-gray, but a true particular gray, the color of winter sky an hour before snow. He was looking at her with those eyes the way a man looks when he is checking someone for damage, quickly, systematically, professionally. "You hurt," he said. His voice was low, slightly rough, and gave away nothing. I don't think so." She took inventory. Her hands were scraped. Her dress was ruined. She would have a bruise on her left hip by tomorrow. "I'm all right." "Sure." "Yes." She was still sitting in the dust against the hardware store wall. She became aware of this and stood, which he assisted by offering a hand without making a production of it. That was... She stopped. What she wanted to say felt too large for the moment. "You saved my life, I think. Quite possibly." He shrugged with the discomfort of a man for whom gratitude is physically uncomfortable. "Wagon was going to hit you." "Yes." Seemed like the thing to do. The crowd had gathered by now, Peterson exclaiming someone leading the horses back, several people talking about the driver who'd been thrown. The cowboy stood to the side of all of it, not performing calm, but genuinely feeling it, watching the street settle back into order, with the patience of someone accustomed to chaos returning to sense. "What's your name?" Clara heard herself ask. "Your full name." He looked at her. The gray eyes took her in briefly. She had the unsettling sense of being read rather than looked at, and then his expression did something that might have been the beginning of a smile but never quite committed. Jesse Calloway. Nora Walsh. She offered her hand, and he shook it once briefly the way people shook hands when they meant it as a conclusion rather than an invitation. Thank you, Mr. Calloway. Truly. He reached down and retrieved his hat from the dust, knocked it against his knee, set it on his head, touched the brim. Ma'am, and walked away. Clara stood in the settling dust of the main street, her ruined dress and scraped hands, and the portfolio still miraculously intact inside her coat, and watched Jesse Calloway's back as he went, and felt something she had not felt in years, or possibly ever, stir somewhere beneath her sternum, which was inconvenient in a number of ways she did not yet have the vocabulary to describe. That evening at dinner, one of the ranch hands mentioned him. Jesse Calloway, they said. Worked out at the Double H. Harmon's place 5 miles east of town. Best horseman in the territory, some said. Kept to himself. Lost his family young parents gone by the time he was 16. Some trouble in Texas that nobody knew quite all of. He had come north 7 years ago with nothing, and had made himself into something by the force of being apparently extraordinarily good with horses, and absolutely reliable in every other respect. Quiet man, the ranch hand concluded, mopping gravy with a biscuit. But the kind of quiet that means he's paying attention, not the kind that means he's got nothing to say. Clara nodded, and said nothing, and filed it all away. 2 days later, she was hanging laundry in the small yard behind the boarding house when she heard the gate latch. She turned. Jesse Calloway was standing at the edge of the yard, hat in both hands, looking like a man who had prepared several versions of what he was about to say and was not satisfied with any of them. Mr. Calloway. Miss Walsh. He cleared his throat. I wanted to check you were all right. From the other day. Sometimes injuries don't show up straight away. It was, she thought, one of the most genuinely considerate things anyone had said to her in months. Not because it was large, it was small, quite small, but because it had required him to come here, and he had come anyway, and he was clearly uncomfortable, and he had come anyway. I'm well, she said. A bruise and some scrapes, nothing that didn't earn its keep. He nodded. His hands worked the brim of his hat around once. He did not leave. Was there something else? She asked gently. He looked up. Those winter eyes met hers and held, and she had again that sensation of being read rather than seen, and this time it lasted long enough to be uncomfortable, and then tipped over into something else. There's a social, he said. Saturday evening. At the church. Nothing fancy. Just townfolk getting together. A pause. I was wondering if you'd like to go. With me. Clara thought of every reasonable argument against it. She had come here to disappear, not to be noticed. Courtship was complication. Complication was risk. She was Nora Walsh for now, and Nora Walsh should keep her head down and her ties loose. I'd like that, she said. The relief on his face was so unguarded that it made her breath catch a brief glimpse of what lived beneath the weathered composure. 6 o'clock, he said. 6 is perfect. He touched the brim of his hat and left, and Clara stood in the laundry yard with a wet sheet draped over her arm and May Lynn's voice behind her. Well, May Lynn said. She had appeared in the doorway at some point. Jesse Calloway. It's just a church social. Everything is just something until it isn't. Clara turned back to the laundry. She could feel May Lynn watching her with that patient measuring attention that seemed to be the older woman's default setting. He's a good man, May Lynn said, not unkindly. Honest. Proud in the way that means something, not the kind that makes trouble. The kind that makes a man hold himself together when things get hard. She paused. He'll need to stand on his own feet. It will matter to him whether it makes sense or not. Clara understood the warning. That night, she took the portfolio from under the mattress and held it in both hands in the dark. The documents inside represented more wealth than everyone in Red Hollow combined would earn in 10 lifetimes. They made her, by any legal definition, one of the wealthiest women in the territory. She should leave. She knew she should leave. She put the portfolio back and went to sleep. Saturday arrived in cool air and pale light, the first hint that summer was not permanent, that something different was coming. Clara worked through her morning chores in a state of distraction that Daisy found enormously entertaining and Mei Lin found mildly exasperating. She scrubbed the kitchen table twice. She almost put salt in the coffee. She stood for 3 minutes in front of the small wardrobe in her room, looking at the 2 dresses she owned that were suitable for evening, one faded green cotton, one blue wool that was too warm, and felt absurdly the echo of what it had been like to stand before a wardrobe in Philadelphia and have the actual problem of choosing. She put on the green one. It fit well. It brought out the color of her eyes in a way she had not planned and did not think about. She had one piece of jewelry, a locket silver her mother's. She had kept it when she left everything else behind. She put it on. At 6 o'clock exactly, she heard a knock at the boarding house door. Mei Lin answered it. Clara stood in the hallway and heard Mei Lin say, "Evening, Jesse," in a tone of voice that conveyed both welcome and assessment simultaneously. And then she appeared in the doorway and saw him. He had cleaned up. Fresh shirt, dark and simply cut, tucked in. Hair combed. Boots polished. He was still entirely a working cowboy. There was no mistaking that, but a working cowboy who had taken care, and the care was visible. He looked at her the way a man looks when he sees something he had hoped for, and finds it exceeded his hopes. Not theatrically, not with any performance of appreciation, just with his eyes which were very honest, and which said what they meant. "You look nice," he said. "Thank you." She felt warmth move up her throat. "So do you." They walked to the church side by side, not touching, making careful conversation about the town and the weather, the polite scaffolding of people who are interested in something more than what they are saying. The evening was cooling rapidly, now the sky going from gold to deep blue overhead, and the first stars were beginning. The church social was exactly as Mei Lin had described, and not at all what Clara had expected. Not because it was different from what she'd been told, but because she had not understood from the description how it would feel. Tables in the churchyard, laden with food, contributed by half the town. Musicians, a fiddle and a guitar, and a man with a harmonica who played with his eyes closed, setting up near the wall. Children running. Couples talking. Old men arguing good-naturedly about something with chairs drawn close. No servants. No calculation of status. No architecture of social hierarchy with its invisible rules and its constant low-grade performance of adequacy. Just people. Just evening. Just the smell of food and the fiddle starting up, and somewhere a child laughing at something genuinely funny. Clara felt her chest expand. Jesse introduced her to people ranch hands he had worked with for years, townfolk who had been here since Red Hollow was 3 buildings, and a dream, a woman named Mrs. Harmon, who looked her over with the thorough efficiency of someone who had raised sons and knew what they needed better than they did. Everyone was welcoming in the direct, unsentimental way of frontier people who understood that everyone had ended up here somehow, and that somewhere was not always the place you started. They ate at one of the long tables, plates balanced on their knees, and Jesse told her about the horses he was working with, a line of green colts that Mr. Harmon had bought cheap from a rancher further north, raw and nervous and full of potential. He talked about horses the way some people talk about books or music, with the fluency of genuine love hands, moving slightly, as he described the particular way a good horse moved when it finally decided to trust you. "You love them," she said. "They're honest," he said. "A horse doesn't pretend. It tells you what it's feeling, what it wants, what it's afraid of." "I appreciate that." The words moved through her like cold water. She looked down at her plate. "Nora." She looked up. His face had shifted slightly, the composure still there, but something beneath it, something careful and deliberate. I heard you told Mei Lin you were running from someone, not the law. Word travels. Small town. He was quiet for a moment. I'm not asking. I just want you to know I understand if there are things you can't talk about. Everyone here came from somewhere. Most of us had reasons. The decency of it was almost unbearable. She thought of Philadelphia, of the men who had courted her with elaborate attention, and had in every case been courting her father's money, and her father's name, and the particular door that opened when you married into the Hale name. She thought of how none of them had ever simply said, "You don't have to explain yourself." "Thank you," she said quietly. The musicians started in earnest as the evening darkened. The churchyard lit up with lanterns. People began to dance. Not waltzes, not the precise performance-conscious dances of ballrooms, but country reels and simple patterns that prioritize joy over execution. Jesse stood and offered his hand. She had been taught to dance by a master in Philadelphia, had waltzed in rooms with floors that reflected the light, with orchestras and white gloves and the constant awareness of being observed. She took Jesse's work-rough hand and let him lead her into steps she had never learned. She was terrible at it. She stepped on his foot twice in the first 30 seconds. Misjudged, the turn came in wrong on a pattern she hadn't anticipated. He caught her each time, easily without making it into anything, just steadied her and kept going. "You all right?" he said after the third near stumble. She was laughing. She hadn't realized she was laughing until she heard it real laughter, not the social kind, bright and helpless. "I am absolutely not," she said. "I'm a disaster." "You're learning," he said, "at the expense of your feet. My boots are thick." And there it was again, that almost smile. "Come on. Step here then turn." She followed. Got it wrong. Got it more right. Got it almost right. Got it. They danced until the musicians paused for water. They walked to the edge of the gathering, where it was quieter, and stood in the good dark beyond the lantern light. The mountains were black shapes against a sky full of stars. "Can I see you again?" Jesse said. "Properly. Not just crossing paths in town." Her heart was doing something inconvenient. "Yes," she said. His exhale was quiet and controlled, but she heard the relief in it. "Same time next week," he said. "I'll think of something." They walked back to the boarding house under the stars. At the door, he paused. "I had a good evening," he said. "I did too." He touched the brim of his hat, walked into the dark. She watched him go until the darkness swallowed him entirely. Inside, Mei Lin was sitting in the front room with a cup of tea and the expression of a woman who has been pretending not to wait. "Good evening," she said. "Very good." Mei Lin looked at her for a long moment. "He'll need a partner," she said finally. "Not a patron. Someone who carries weight beside him, not above him." "I know." "Do you—" Clara thought of the portfolio under the mattress, of the documents turning to ash in this story's first scene, which had not happened yet, which was still 6 months in the future, of the choice that was coming, that she could already feel moving toward her like weather. "I'm learning," she said. Mei Lin nodded slowly. "That's the only honest answer there is." The weeks that followed had a quality that Clara would later describe, when she tried to describe it at all, as dangerous happiness. She worked at the boarding house, and she got better at it. Her bread began to rise. Her biscuits achieved a lightness that Daisy celebrated with genuine enthusiasm. She learned to manage the stove's opinions, to judge by smell and feel and color, rather than time alone. Her hands finished their transformation, the last of the city softness gone. The calluses permanent, now her fingers strong in ways she had never imagined needing. And every Saturday evening, Jesse Calloway came calling. Sometimes it was the church social. Sometimes it was a walk through town after the day's heat had broken, talking about horses and books and the small events of a week in Red Hollow. Sometimes it was nothing more than sitting on the boarding house porch in the cooling evening, side by side in Mei Lin's mismatched chairs, while Daisy pretended not to watch from the kitchen window. He told her things. Not all at once, he was not that kind of person, but in installments, the way you might add wood to a fire piece by piece, not letting it go out. He told her about Texas, about the small ranch his parents had worked until the fever took them in the same week, which had left 16-year-old Jesse alone with 2 horses, a rifle, and the specific terror of being entirely responsible for his own survival. About working his way north ranch, job to job, learning the trade of horses as he went. About arriving at the Double H 5 years ago with a reputation for being good with difficult animals, and finding for the first time a place that wanted to keep him. "Mr. Harmon gave me a chance when he didn't have to," Jesse said one evening watching the street. "I was nobody. No family, no references, nothing but a string of former employers who'd say I did the job. He hired me anyway. That meant something." "It means something to be trusted," Clara said. "More than most things." She felt him look at her. She kept her eyes on the street. "What about you?" he said. What was it like before? She had her answer ready. She had always had her answer ready. But she found that what came out was not entirely the prepared version. "It was very full," she said, "of things that weren't mine. People who wanted me to be something. A life that had been decided before I had any say in it." She paused. "I didn't feel like a person. I felt like a position." Jesse was quiet for a moment. "Who held the position before you?" She looked at him surprised. "My mother. She died when I was 12. And then it was yours, whether you wanted it or not." "Yes." She had not thought of it that way. It was true. "Yes, exactly." He nodded, said nothing more, but she felt that he had understood something, not the details which he didn't have, but the shape of it. The thing that a detail, however accurate, sometimes failed to convey. She understood in that moment what it was she felt for Jesse Calloway, and she was terrified, and she said nothing about it. In early November, on a Sunday afternoon, when the sky was the particular cold blue of Montana autumn, Jesse took her on a picnic to a ridge above the valley. He had asked her the previous Saturday with the careful, deliberate quality that she had come to recognize as his version of being nervous. Everything very precisely worded, very complete, leaving her no space to ask clarifying questions. It was, she had decided, one of his more endearing qualities. They sat on a blanket he had brought, wrapped in their coats with bread and hard cheese and dried apples, watching the sun move through the final hours of a short afternoon. Below them, Red Hollow was a handful of buildings and smoke trails. Beyond it, the valley spread toward mountains that had turned purple and gold. "Nora," Jesse said. She turned. His face had changed. The composure was still there, but something was working beneath it. "I know we haven't known each other long," he said. 2 months, and I know I'm a man without much to offer. Ranch wages and a good name, and nothing in the bank worth speaking of." He looked out at the valley. "But I care about you, more than I've cared about anyone in a long time. And I want you to know whatever you're running from, whatever put that look on your face sometimes when you think no one's watching. I'm not asking you to explain it. But I'll stand between you and it, if you need me to." Clara's chest ached. He thought she was vulnerable. He thought she was someone who needed protecting. He was in the most literal possible sense mistaken. She was one of the wealthiest women in the territory, and she had resources and connections and legal standing that could handle almost anything that came at her. She did not need protecting. She needed something far harder to find than protection. She needed to be chosen. "Thank you," she managed. "That means more than I can tell you." He reached out and took her hand. His fingers were calloused and warm around hers. They sat that way as the sun moved toward the horizon, and the cold deepened, and neither of them spoke, and it was one of the most honest moments Clara Hale had experienced in her entire life, because the warmth was real, and the company was real, and the silence between them was the good kind of silence, the kind that did not need filling. She was in love with him. She had been in love with him for weeks, probably. She was only now admitting it. She pressed her free hand against the portfolio inside her coat and felt the edges of it thin flat, representing everything she was lying about. And she thought, I will tell him. Soon. I will find a way. I will make him understand. She thought not today. She thought, just let me have today. The weeks after were the sweetest and most unsustainable she had known. Jesse came by the boarding house almost daily, now some excuse about a horse at the livery supplies from Peterson's, a meeting at the saloon that ended somehow at May Lynn's kitchen table with a cup of coffee and an hour of conversation before he had to ride back to the Double H. Daisy found this predictable development delightful. May Lynn found it inevitable. The boarders had started to tease Clara not unkindly in the way of men who have noticed something that they consider obvious and good. Clara found it impossible, wonderful, terrifying. She went to the Double H on a Sunday afternoon in late November at Jesse's invitation to meet Mr. and Mrs. Harmon. The ride out in the borrowed wagon blanket over her knees against the cold, watching Jesse handle the horses with the easy authority of long practice that was one kind of happiness. Mrs. Harmon, who was a compact, sharp-eyed woman who asked questions the way a lawyer took depositions, was another. You've got education, Mrs. Harmon said over coffee that was too strong and a cake that wasn't in the warm kitchen of the ranch house. It was the same observation May Lynn had made, and Clara wondered how obvious it was, really, and what exactly gave it away. Nothing wrong with that. I was a schoolteacher before I was anything else. She studied Clara with the directness of someone who had stopped having patience for indirectness sometime in her 40s. What do you want, Miss Walsh? Not what you're running from. What do you want? The question hit her like cold water. No one asked her that. Not in Philadelphia, where what she wanted was irrelevant next to what was required of her. Not in Red Hollow, where people assumed that what she wanted was what anyone wanted. Steady work, safe harbor, a place to be. I want to choose, Clara said. What I do, who I'm with, what matters. She paused. I want to build something that's actually mine. Mrs. Harmon studied her. Then she glanced at Jesse, who was across the room talking to Mr. Harmon with his hat in his hands. And then she looked back at Clara. He's been alone a long time, she said quietly enough that it was only for Clara. It makes a man careful, not cold careful. There's a difference. He doesn't give much, but what he gives he means. I know. Do you intend to stay in Red Hollow? Clara thought of the portfolio, the fire, the future she had been circling. Yes, she said. I do. Mrs. Harmon nodded once. End of examination. After the coffee, Jesse took her through the stables, and she watched him with the horses, the careful, confident gentleness of it, the way they moved toward him, rather than away, the way he spoke to them, in a low, continuous voice that was not quite words. And she thought, I need to tell him. Tonight. I need to tell him tonight. She didn't. There was never quite the right moment, and the wrong moments stretched themselves out, one after another, until she was climbing back into the wagon with the late afternoon cold settling over the valley, and Jesse was taking up the reins, and the moment had passed. She would tell him, she promised herself. Before Christmas. Certainly before Christmas. He asked her to marry him on Christmas Eve. The town had gathered at the church hall pine branches and paper ornaments, and children who had been wound up past the point of return by the proximity of something special. The women had put out a shared meal on the long tables. Someone had organized small gifts for the children wrapped in cloth and ribbon, that would be carefully smoothed and reused. It was nothing like the Christmases Clara had known, and it was everything a Christmas should be. Colt found her after the meal, as people began to drift toward dancing. "Walk with me," he said. They went out into the cold. The snow had stopped. The sky was a brilliant darkness overhead, the stars so thick and low that they seemed like something you could reach, and walked to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open country. In the distance, she could see the lights of the Double H scattered across the dark. Jesse stopped walking. "I've been trying to find the right words for this since October," he said. He was looking out at the valley, not at her. "I don't have much. I've got my wages and my reputation and a good horse and whatever I can build from that." He turned to face her. "But I've got myself, and I'd like to give that to you if you want it." He reached into his coat pocket and produced a ring. Silver simply made with a small stone that caught the starlight. He must have saved for months. Clara looked at the ring, looked at his face, the composure undone just enough for her to see what lived beneath it, the hope and the careful, controlled terror of a man who does not lose easily and knows what this means to him. She thought, "I have to tell him. Right now. I have to tell him before I say anything else." She thought of his face when she told him, of the hope in it being replaced by something else, of him looking at her the way she had dreaded being looked at since the moment she stepped off the train. She thought of her mother's locket against her breastbone, of the narrow room that was hers, of a life she was building one calloused day at a time. "Yes," she said. Her voice broke on the word, just slightly, just enough. He let out a breath and stepped toward her and slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, not the polished, performed kiss of men who had practiced it as a social art, but something real, something that meant what it said, warm against the cold night air. Walking back to town, his arm around her shoulders, Clara felt happiness and terror in equal measure, and she thought, "I will tell him." After the wedding, early in the new year, I will find the words. She did not know yet that the words would be found for her. That night, after the celebrations, after Jesse had walked her to the boarding house door, with the careful happiness of a man who cannot quite believe his luck, Clara sat in her room in the dark with the leather portfolio on her lap. She thought about what she was about to bind him to, a marriage built on a name that wasn't hers, a partnership founded on the omission of the most fundamental fact about her. She thought about the documents in the portfolio, about how each one of them was a piece of the thing. She was hiding a deed, a certificate, a contract, about how each one made the lie larger. She went downstairs. The kitchen was dark except for the stove banked for the night, but still warm. She opened the firebox, took out the first document. "What are you doing?" Mei Lin stood in the kitchen doorway in her robe, her dark hair loose over her shoulders, her expression unreadable. Clara showed her the document. Watched the older woman cross the kitchen, look at it, understand it. "Property deeds," Mei Lin said, "and bank certificates." She looked at Clara. "How much are you burning?" "Enough." Mei Lin was quiet for a long moment. "My name is Clara Hale," Clara said. It was the first time she had said her real name aloud since Philadelphia. It felt strange. "My father built railroads. When he died, I inherited more than I can explain. I came here to be someone else. But I can't marry Jesse carrying all of this. He'd never—" She stopped. "I need to make it possible for us to be equals. You're destroying your inheritance." "I'm destroying the evidence of it. The money is still in banks in Philadelphia, but without these documents, he deserves to know," Mei Lin said. "He deserves a wife who chose him, not someone who brings a fortune into his house and watches him try to provide against it." She fed another deed into the fire. "This is the only way I know how to give him that." Mei Lin watched the documents burn. When 3 were gone, she reached out and stilled Clara's hands. "Keep one," she said. "One document. Small if you can. Hidden. Not for you for emergencies. Life out here is not predictable, Clara. You have no idea what you'll need." The name, her real name, in Mei Lin's voice settled something. "Why are you helping me?" Clara asked. Mei Lin looked at the fire. "Because I watched my husband's family take everything from me after he died. Because the law allowed it. Because I was a woman and a foreigner, and there was nothing I could do." Her voice was level, unemotional, a fact stated with the precision of long handling. "I know what it is to stand in a room watching your life burn. I also know that keeping one piece back is not cowardice. It is survival." Clara selected a single certificate mid-size, not the largest, and set it aside. Everything else went into the fire. They watched it together until the last page was ash. "I hope he's worth it," Mei Lin said. "He is," Clara said. And then, because she was trying to be honest, "I think so. I believe so." "That's the best anyone can say," Mei Lin said. She put her hand briefly over Clara's on the edge of the stove. "Go to sleep. You're getting married tomorrow." Clara went to bed. She did not sleep. But when morning came, and the church bell rang and Daisy was at her door with wildflowers she had found God knows where in the middle of winter, Clara got up and put on the dress she had sewn simple white cotton. Nothing like the elaborate silk her mother would have wanted. And she went to get married. Jesse stood at the front of the church in his best clothes, with his hat in his hands, and his face lit with a joy so unguarded that it hurt to look at directly. Clara walked toward him through the warmth of the gathered town, and thought with the clarity of a decision already made. This is real. Whatever else is complicated, this is real. The preacher said the words. They said them back. When he kissed her in the church with half of Red Hollow watching, it was exactly as real as she had decided it was. The little house on the edge of Red Hollow had 3 rooms, a stove that worked. If you coaxed it, a roof that Jesse had patched in 3 places, and windows that did not quite fit their frames. In the morning, the cold came through the gaps and pooled on the floor until the fire got going. In the evening, the wind found the same gaps and made a low sound against the glass. Not quite a whistle, not quite a moan. Something between the two. Clara loved it. This surprised her. And then it didn't. She had grown up in a house with 40 rooms, and she had spent the better part of her childhood finding the smallest ones. The window seat off the second-floor landing, the narrow space behind the library shelves, the pantry off the kitchen where Mrs. Graves, the cook, would give her biscuits and ask about her lessons, and not expect anything of her in return. She had always understood that size was not comfort, that grandeur was not warmth. This house was warm, not because of the stove alone, but because it was theirs only, and entirely theirs, earned by the work of 2 people who had not been given it, who had no reason to be here, except that they had chosen each other. And this was where the choosing had led. Jesse left before dawn. He always left before dawn, because the work at the Double H began before dawn, and Mr. Harmon was a fair employer, but expected his men to be there when the day started. Clara would hear him moving through the house in the dark, careful not to wake her, and she would lie still and listen to the sounds of him, the creak of the kitchen floor, the soft thud of the stove door, the particular sound of coffee being poured, and feel something she could not quite name settle over her like a second blanket. The first morning alone, she stood in the kitchen after he left and looked at the stove and the shelf with its modest line of supplies and thought, I have to feed us. By myself. With this. She made coffee. That worked. She attempted biscuits. They were architectural. She went to Mei Lin. The weeks of early marriage were a different kind of education than the boarding house had been. At Mei Lin's, she had been learning a trade. Here she was learning a life. The difference was that at the boarding house, if she failed, the boarders grumbled and moved on. Here, if she failed, it was her table and her husband and her house. She did not want to fail. Mei Lin came 3 times in the first 2 weeks, not when invited, simply when she arrived bearing a cast iron pan or a particular spice, or once a written list of instructions for bread making, so detailed it might have been a legal document. "You hold the dough like it owes you something," Mei Lin said, watching her. "It does. It keeps coming out wrong. You're fighting it. Bread isn't a fight." Mei Lin's hands replaced hers on the dough, demonstrating. "You work with what it wants to be. You can guide it. You can't force it." Clara watched. Tried. Failed slightly. Tried again. "Better," Mei Lin said. Daisy came on Sundays with cheerful reports of boarding house gossip, which boarders were feuding, what Gerald the traveling salesman had said. This time the minor ongoing drama of the kitchen stove, which had developed what Daisy described as a temper, and what Mei Lin described as a maintenance issue. She would sit at Clara's kitchen table drinking tea and filling the small house with the easy brightness of her company, and Clara would feel something she recognized from the boarding house, the specific warmth of a friend who was not calculating anything, who was simply there. She loved Daisy. She had not understood quite how much until these Sunday visits, when the house was fuller and louder and better. She did not think about George Pruitt. She had promised herself she would not think about George Pruitt. She had built a careful wall around the knowledge of who Daisy was and what connected them, and she maintained that wall with the same daily effort she brought to everything else. It would hold. She believed it would hold. Disaster arrived in the form of rain. 3 weeks into marriage, a storm moved in from the north, the kind of storm that the territory produced in February, heavy and determined, and entirely uninterested in the plans of the people below it. It rained for 2 days. On the 2nd day, the roof began to leak. Not in 1 place, in 3. Clara spent a frantic hour moving their few belongings away from the drips, arranging pots and buckets, and 1 large bowl she had been using for bread rising, and then stood in the middle of the bedroom and looked at the brown stains spreading across the ceiling, and felt for the first time since the wedding the cold weight of what they did not have. In Philadelphia, she would have called the housekeeper, who would have called a contractor, who would have appeared within the day, with materials and men, and the problem would have resolved itself by evening, with no further engagement from Clara required. The idea of having a leaking roof and not being able to fix it was simply not a category of experience she had possessed. She possessed it now. When Jesse came home that evening and found her sitting on the bedroom floor with buckets arranged around her, his face did something complicated. He stood in the doorway looking at the ceiling for a long time. "I thought I had it," he said. "The patches. You did your best with what you had. That's not good enough. You shouldn't have to live like this." "Jesse," she stood, "we'll fix it. Together. Tell me what needs doing, and I'll do my part. It's not your part to—" "I'm your wife, not your guest." She said it without anger, just steadily. "We fix things together, or we don't fix them. That's what together means." He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked away, and she could see the muscle in his jaw work, the pride and the frustration doing battle with each other, and the fatigue underneath both of them. "The materials will cost more than I've got right now," he said, not looking at her. "Landlord won't cover it. I'd need to wait until the end of the month, save the wages, and—" "I can take in sewing," Clara said. "Mei Lin mentioned Mrs. Peterson has more alterations than she can handle herself." "You shouldn't have to—" "We are partners," she said again more quietly. "Partners don't divide work into yours and mine. They divide it into what needs doing." He was silent for a long moment. Then he came into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. The bed he had built, the frame he had cut and sanded, and fitted himself, and pressed his hands over his face. "I wanted to give you more than this," he said. "I wanted to give you, I don't know, something better." Clara sat beside him. "You have given me something better," she said. "You've given me a life that's mine. I'll take a leaking roof over a gilded cage any day of the week." She had not meant to say the last part. It was too specific, too revealing. But Jesse only leaned back slightly and turned to look at her, and the gray eyes were tired and grateful in equal measure. "You're very strange," he said, not unkindly. "I know. I mean that as a compliment." "I know that too." He put his arm around her, and she leaned into his shoulder, and outside the rain continued its indifferent work on the roof. She went to Mrs. Peterson the next morning. Margaret Peterson, wife of the storekeeper, was a compact, energetic woman in her 50s who seemed to operate at a slightly faster speed than the world around her, and had learned to accommodate this by doing 3 things at once. She received Clara's offer of sewing help with the unambiguous relief of a person who has been overwhelmed for months and is too proud to ask for assistance. "Alterations mostly," she said, already pulling boxes from under the counter. "Some mending. A few commissions, women who want dresses made but don't have the time or skill themselves." She paused. "You do good work." "I do careful work," Clara said honestly. "I'm not the fastest." Careful and not fast beats fast and careless every time. Mrs. Peterson put the first box in her hands. "Start with these. Come back when you're done." Clara spent her afternoons bent over the work fingers, moving through the familiar motions of stitching and finishing that she had learned in Philadelphia not as a survival skill, but as a genteel accomplishment. Here it was both. Her eyes ached in the dim afternoon light. Her back protested the hours of hunching. Her fingers, just beginning to recover their sense of themselves from the boarding house work, were reacquainted with the particular soreness of needlework. The money helped. Not enormously 50 cents here, a dollar there, but enough. Enough to buy the materials for the roof. Enough to add a little to the small reserve they were building coin by careful coin in the tin on the kitchen shelf. Jesse fixed the roof on a Saturday. She held the ladder. It was Deputy Sam Archer who complicated things. She had seen him around town since her arrival, a lean, quiet man of perhaps 32, with the careful eyes of someone who had trained himself to observe without appearing to. He wore his deputy's badge with the slight self-consciousness of a man who had not been born to authority, and he had a habit of standing at the edges of gatherings rather than in them watching. She had not worried about him particularly. Red Hollow's law enforcement was Sheriff Dawson, who was competent and fair, and had very little interest in the origins of his town's residents. Archer was the deputy, which in a town this size mostly meant keeping the peace on Saturday nights, and making sure the miners' disputes did not become something worse. It was a Thursday morning in late February. Jesse had taken a job 2 valleys over, breaking a string of wild horses for a rancher who needed them ready by spring, and Clara was at Peterson's general store picking up supplies when Archer appeared at the end of the aisle. He was holding a newspaper. He was not reading it. He was looking at her. Clara's hands tightened on the flour sack she was holding. "Mrs. Calloway," he said. His voice was pleasant. Nothing in it alarmed her. "Got a minute?" She followed him to the back of the store, away from Peterson and the 2 miners examining rope near the front. He showed her the newspaper. It was the Denver Post, 3 weeks old, and the article he had folded it open to was on the 4th page. The headline was small, and she read it before she could decide whether she wanted to. "Hale heiress, still missing, estate manager offers reward for information." Below it, a photograph. Clara Hale at some Philadelphia function 18 months ago, in the kind of dress that cost more than this store earned in a month, her dark hair arranged by a professional, her posture, the practiced posture of someone who had spent a lifetime being looked at. She looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then she looked at Sam Archer. "How long?" she said. "About a month." He folded the paper and set it on the barrel beside him. "I recognized you the 2nd week you were here. The photograph isn't perfect, but close enough if you know what you're looking for." "And you waited." I wanted to see what you were going to do." He said it without apology. Whether you were going to run again or stay. Whether Jesse knowing or not knowing made any difference to what you were building here. He looked at her steadily. "I'm not in the business of destroying things that are working." Clara felt something cautious move through her. Not relief. She was not ready for relief. "Then why are you showing me this now?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because the man in this article, the estate manager Franklin Dorr, I sent some inquiries out the way I sometimes do when something doesn't add up. And he's coming Mrs. Calloway. He's been to Billings, and he's been to Helena, and he's working his way through the territory's towns with a photograph and a set of questions." He met her eyes. "I'd say you have 2 weeks, maybe 3. The store settled around them. Clara could hear Peterson out front making change for the miners. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Sam Archer looked down at his hands. They were the hands of a man who did things with them calloused, marked by work. "I had a sister," he said. "She was in a situation she needed to get out of. Not the law, something else. Worse in some ways." He paused. There was someone who could have warned her, who knew what was coming and didn't say anything because it wasn't their business. He folded the newspaper one more time, smaller. She got out eventually, but it cost her things it didn't have to cost. He set the folded paper on the barrel. "I'm not making the same choice twice." Clara looked at him for a long time. "I need to tell him," she said. It was not quite a question. "That's between you and your husband." He stood. "But if you're going to, you should do it before Dorr does it for you. A truth told by the person it belongs to lands different than a truth told by someone with a motive." He picked up his hat from where it had been resting on the barrel. "You've got some time, Mrs. Calloway. Use it." He walked back to the front of the store. Clara heard him exchange a few words with Peterson, and then the door opened and closed. She stood in the back of the general store for a long time, holding a flour sack, looking at the folded newspaper on the barrel. Then she picked it up and tucked it under her arm and went to pay for her flour. She meant to tell him that night. Jesse was away for 3 weeks, the job 2 valleys over. The wild horses the money they needed. She had 3 weeks to compose the words to find the way in to prepare for the conversation that had been coming since before she stepped off the train. She spent the 3 weeks doing no such thing. She sewed. She cooked better. Now the bread. Genuine bread, the biscuits. Light her hands finally fluent in the work she had been learning since September. She visited May Lynn and sat with Daisy on Sundays and went to church and walked the town and was Nora Walsh Calloway, and the role had become so natural that she had to work sometimes to remember it was a role. She thought about Jesse. She thought about his face when she had said yes, about the ring, the small silver ring he had saved for while she had sat on a fortune, about the way he had said on their wedding night, "Welcome home," and meant it with his whole chest. She thought he will understand. She thought he will not understand. She thought tell him when he gets back, before anything else. The first night. He came back on a cold March evening, riding up to the house at dusk, and she went out the door without even grabbing a coat, and he caught her in his arms and held on. And his coat smelled like horses and cold air, and 3 weeks of missing him. And she thought tonight. I'll tell him tonight. She did not tell him that night. She told herself tomorrow. Tomorrow became the next day. The next day became a week. The week became April, and then May. And she was still carrying the thing she had promised herself she would put down. It was a bright morning in early May when everything ended. She was in the yard behind their little house hanging laundry in the first real warmth of spring, her face tipped up to the sun, her hands automatic on the sheets. The town was going about its business. Somewhere down the main street she could hear the blacksmith's hammer. Then she heard something else. A commotion, raised voices, the sound of horses too many, moving too deliberately, and something in the quality of the noise, some particular note in it, that made the hair on the back of her neck rise before she had consciously identified why. She came around to the front of the house, still holding a damp shirt. The carriage was the wrong thing entirely. For Red Hollow's Main Street, too black, too polished. The horses too well matched, the driver in actual livery. It had stopped in the middle of the road, with the complete indifference of something that did not expect to be challenged, and the people of Red Hollow were giving it the wide berth of things that are inexplicable and possibly dangerous. The door opened. Franklin Dorr stepped down. He was exactly as she remembered, tall, silver-haired, with the cold precision of a man who had spent 40 years ensuring that surprises did not happen to him. He wore a suit that was fastidiously wrong for the territory, and he looked at Red Hollow's Main Street with the expression of a man who is making careful note of an offense. Behind him, a younger man with a leather case. Clara's hands went still on the damp shirt. She had 2 seconds, perhaps 3, before he turned and saw her. 2 seconds in which she could have gone back inside, could have gone out the back, could have done any number of things. She did not move. He turned, found her with his eyes the way a compass finds north directly, inevitably, without searching. He was already moving toward her. Clara dropped the shirt and went inside. Mei Lin was at the front door before Dorr reached it. Clara did not know how she got there so fast. Mei Lin seemed to have a particular awareness of disruptions to the town's ordinary order that functioned like a seventh sense. "There are men asking questions," Mei Lin said, coming into the kitchen. "I know." Clara had both hands pressed against her face. "I know. Mei Lin, I'll tell them nothing. He'll know I'm here. He already knows." She dropped her hands. "He's Franklin Dorr. He managed my father's estate. He doesn't come somewhere without knowing." She forced herself to breathe. "He's going to approach Jesse." Mei Lin's expression did something fine and controlled. "Where is Jesse?" "At the Double H. He'll be back by evening." "Then you have the afternoon." "To do what?" Mei Lin looked at her with the patient, unyielding gaze of someone who has already assessed the situation and knows what needs to be said. "To decide what you're going to do, Clara. Not what you wish you'd done. Not what you should have done. What you're going to do today." Clara sat down heavily at her own kitchen table. Outside, she could hear Dorr's measured footsteps on the main street, moving from building to building. She thought about Sam Archer's words, "A truth told by the person it belongs to lands different than a truth told by someone with a motive." She had had weeks to be that person. She had not used them. Now Dorr was in town, and time was a thing she no longer had. He came to the door that afternoon. She had known he would have known it with the certainty of someone who knows the shape of the blow before it lands. She had sent Mei Lin away, had told her she would handle it alone, and she stood in her kitchen with flour on her hands from bread she was trying to make, and heard his knock. Formal, measured, belonging to a different kind of door than this one, and went to answer it. "Eliza," he said when she opened it. Not a question, a statement of conclusion, the tone of a man filing a result. "My name is Nora Calloway. I think you have the wrong, don't insult either of us." His cold eyes moved past her, into the house, the small rooms, the rough furniture, the evidence of a life lived without the resources both of them knew she possessed. His expression did not show disgust exactly. It showed something worse, incomprehension, the genuine inability to understand why anyone would choose this. "May I come in?" It was not a question. She stepped back. Dorr entered and conducted a brief silent survey of the interior, the way a general surveys unfamiliar terrain. Then he turned to face her. "You've been gone 11 months, he said. "Do you have any conception of what that has meant? For the estate, for the businesses, for the hundreds of people who depend on Hale Industries for their livelihoods. You've been managing it. Managing it, yes, managing it as best I can without the actual heir's signature on anything that requires the actual heir's signature, which is, let me assure you, a great deal of things. He reached into his jacket. I have documents here that require your attention. These alone. I'm not going back to Philadelphia. He stopped, looked at her. I have a life here, she said. A husband, a home. You have a cabin and a cowboy. His voice was not unkind. It was something more difficult to argue with certain. The certainty of someone who genuinely cannot conceive that the situation is what it appears to be. Your father built something. It exists. It continues to exist. It requires you. And staying here does not make it cease to require you. It simply means it exists without you, which is better for no one. Mr. Dorr. Your husband, he said. Does he know who you are? The silence lasted 1 second. 2. I thought not. His eyes were not unkind. They were precise. What do you imagine he will say when he learns that you have been, how to phrase it, conducting an experiment in poverty, that you have allowed him to work himself to exhaustion, trying to provide for a woman who has more money than he will see in 10 lifetimes? Get out, she said. He moved toward the door, paused, hand on the frame. You cannot keep this indefinitely, he said. The longer you wait, the worse it is. For him as much as for you. He paused. I'm staying at the boarding house. I'll give you time to think. But I won't wait forever, Eliza. And I won't leave without you. He left. Clara stood in her kitchen, the kitchen she had learned to cook in the house Jesse had mended with his own hands, and felt the walls pressing in. She did not tell Jesse that night either. She told him part of it enough to explain the carriage, the man from the east, the reason she had been pale and quiet all evening. She said a man from her past had found her a man, connected to the life she had left, and that he wanted her to return. Then he won't have what he wants, Jesse said. He was standing at the kitchen window looking at the dark street below, with the particular stillness of a man who has decided something and is not going to move from it. Jesse, it's not simple. You're my wife. That's simple. There are things I haven't told you. She stopped, started again. There are things I should have told you. Before we were married. Before. Nora. He turned from the window. His eyes found hers in the lamplight. Whatever it is, whatever you're carrying, it doesn't change you. It doesn't change what we've built here. It doesn't change what I know you to be. She looked at him. At the absolute certainty in him, the certainty that was both his greatest strength and the thing that made what was coming so much worse. Let me handle Dorr, he said. If he comes to this door again, I'll deal with it. You can't deal with this one, she said softly. Watch me. She looked at him for a long, long moment. She thought, tell him now, right now, before another hour passes. And she looked at his face, calm, resolved, absolutely confident in her. And she did not. The town had been watching. She knew it had been watching. Red Hollow was not a large town, and a polished black carriage with a liveried driver was not an invisible thing. Within a day, everyone knew that a fancy Eastern man had come, and that he was connected somehow to Jesse Calloway's wife, and the particular engine of frontier speculation was running. Dorr did not help. He took his room at the boarding house Mei Lin to her credit, gave him the smallest room with the worst light, without apparently meaning to, and proceeded to make himself visible. He spoke to Peterson. He spoke to the saloon keeper. He walked the town with the deliberate thoroughness of a man conducting an investigation. Sam Archer appeared at Clara's door 2 days after Dorr arrived. He's been asking questions, Archer said. He was wearing his badge, and his expression was the careful one, the one she had come to understand, meant he was managing several pieces of information at once. About you. About your background. He's got a photograph better than the newspaper one. I know. Mrs. Calloway. He paused. He's going to do something public. I can feel it. Men like that, men from that world, they use public revelation as leverage. If they can make it about your husband's reputation, rather than just about you, they've got more to work with. Clara felt cold. He'll use Jesse. He'll try to. Archer met her eyes. If you're going to tell your husband, and I think you need to tell your husband it should happen before whatever Door is planning. I know. Mrs. Calloway. Clara. It was the first time he had used her real name, and she understood it was deliberate, a small, precise reminder of who she was and what was at stake. Whatever you're afraid of about how he'll take it, the version where he hears it from you, is better than every other version. I promise you that. She nodded. He left. She went inside and sat at the kitchen table and thought about how to begin. She had been thinking about how to begin for months. She had never gotten past the first word. The Harmons hosted a small supper the following Saturday. It was not a formal occasion, just the 6 of them, the Harmons and their hired hand Walt and Clara and Jesse, to mark Jesse's 5th anniversary at the Double H. Mrs. Harmon had made a cake. Mr. Harmon had opened a bottle of whiskey he had been saving. Walt had put on a clean shirt. Daisy was there too, invited by Mrs. Harmon, who had always liked her. She came directly from the boarding house, still slightly flowery, and sat beside Clara with the comfortable ease of long friendship, and spent the early part of the evening making Walt, who was shy to the point of invisibility, feel included in the conversation with the expert application of direct questions and genuine interest. Clara sat and watched and tried to memorize it. The lamplight. Jesse's voice across the table talking horses with Mr. Harmon. Daisy's laugh. The smell of cake. She was memorizing it because she understood with the specific clarity of someone standing at the edge of a change that this was the last evening that would be exactly this. After tonight, one way or another, something would be different. The door opened. No one had knocked. The door simply opened, and Franklin Dorr stepped in. He was impeccably dressed for an uninvited guest. He looked around the room with the composed interest of a man at a gallery opening, and then he set his eyes on Clara and held them there. I apologize for the interruption, he said. He did not sound apologetic. I had hoped to find you Mrs. Calloway. I have waited several days for an opportunity, and the direct approach seems to have become necessary. Mr. Dorr, Clara said. Her voice was very level. This is a private. The woman you know as Nora Calloway, Dorr said, addressing the room, is Clara Hale, daughter of James Hale of Philadelphia, heir to Hale Industries and the Hale Estate Silver Mines Railroad Contracts Bank Holdings. He reached into his jacket and produced a document. I have her photograph here taken 18 months ago in Philadelphia, if anyone requires confirmation. She has been living under a false name since she arrived in Red Hollow last summer. The room went very still. Clara did not look at anyone else. She looked at Jesse. He was sitting very still across the table. The animation of the conversation he had been having with Mr. Harmon was gone. His face was the face she had seen once before, on the ridge above the valley, when he was choosing his words carefully, because what he was about to say mattered to him. That same quality of controlled, precise attention. He looked at the document Dorr was holding. Then he looked at her. She did not look away. Is it true? He said. Quiet. Direct. She had wanted to give him this as a gift. She had wanted to give him the truth before it was taken from her and handed to someone else. She had failed at that. She could at least give him the truth itself now, without hesitation. Yes, she said. The word settled into the room like a stone into still water. Jesse looked at her for a long moment. She watched his face and could not read it. There was too much happening beneath the surface, too many things at once, and his particular discipline of composure was holding against all of them. He put down his fork. He pushed back his chair. He picked up his hat from the peg by the Harmon's door and put it on. Then he walked out, not slamming the door, not saying anything, just going. Clara sat at the table and listened to the sound of his boots on the porch, and then on the steps, and then gone into the night, and felt the specific quality of a silence that has been shaped by an absence. "I think, Mrs., Harmon said into the silence, that we should give these two some privacy." She looked at Dor with an expression that was not quite hostile and not quite welcoming, the expression of a woman who will be civil because she has chosen to be civil, and not for any other reason. "Sir, I'll ask you to leave my house." Dor inclined his head, pocketed his document, and left. Daisy's hand found Clara's under the table. She held it for a moment, brief, warm, saying something that neither of them had words for yet. Then she stood and followed the Harmons from the room, and Clara was alone at the table with the remains of the supper and the open bottle of whiskey and the cake nobody had finished. She walked home alone. The night was clear and cold, and the stars were out, and the town she had come to know went about its evening business around her voices from the saloon lamplight in windows, a dog barking at something in the dark. She had walked this street 100 times. She knew every board in the sidewalk, every gap where the mud came through in rain. She went to the house and lit the lamp and sat on the edge of the bed Jesse had built and waited. The hours moved slowly. The lamp burned down. She trimmed it and it burned some more. Outside, the town went quiet by degrees, the saloon last as always. He came back after midnight. The door opened quietly. He moved through the house without the lamp, he knew it well enough in the dark, and stood in the bedroom doorway. Clara looked at him. She could not read his face in the dim light. "Where did you go?" she asked. "The double H." His voice was the careful voice, the one that was managing something. "Talk to Mr. Harmon." "He already knew," she said. It was not a guess. "He and Martha both. Said they'd had their suspicions since the early days, but figured everyone had reasons." He paused. "They were kinder about it than I deserved to be." "Than you deserved." He moved into the room. Not to her, to the window, standing with his back to her, looking out at the dark street. "I prided myself," he said, "on being a man who sees things clearly, who isn't fooled, who can read a situation and a person." A pause. "I didn't see this. I was very careful. I know. That's not the point." His hands were in his pockets. She could see the set of his shoulders, the particular tension of a man holding himself together by an act of will. "The point is, I was working. I was taking every job I could find, every dangerous ride, every long hour, trying to give you a decent life. Trying to be the kind of man who could provide." His voice had something rough in it now. "And all that time you had, yes, more than I'll ever, Jesse." She stood, crossed the room, did not touch him, stood close enough to touch, and did not. "Will you let me explain, not defend? Explain. The real version, the part I should have told you months ago." He was very still. "Please," she said. A long pause. Then he turned from the window and sat on the edge of the bed, his elbows on his knees, his face in his hands. Then he took his hands away and looked at her. "Tell me," he said. She told him. Not the practiced version she had been composing for months, which was shaped for ease, which moved quickly past the difficult parts and lingered on the sympathetic ones. The real version. About her father, about the brilliance and the ruthlessness and the way he had built his empire, the methods that had seemed like business and were sometimes something else. About the documents she had found after his death, going through the estate papers, the evidence of what Hale Industries had done to smaller operations to people who had been in the way. About the specific knowledge that had broken something in her, the file on George Pruitt. Jesse looked up when she said the name. "A miner," she said. "He had a small operation, a claim a few men working it. Hale Industries wanted the land. There were methods used. She did not elaborate on the methods. She did not need to. He lost everything. His operation, his savings, the life he had built. She stopped. He died 3 years after. His daughter came to work at Mei Lin's boarding house. Jesse was very still. "Daisy," he said. "Daisy." The name sat between them. "I didn't know when I arrived. I found out in February, from a photograph in her room." She looked at her hands. "I have been living beside her for months, watching her work and laugh, and she brought me wildflowers on my wedding day. Wildflowers in February because she wanted me to have something beautiful." The silence was heavy. "And you didn't tell her," Jesse said. "I didn't know how. And then more time passed, and it was worse, and—" She stopped. "There is no good explanation. I was a coward. I kept thinking there would be a better time, a better way. There wasn't. There isn't." Jesse looked at the floor for a long time. "The money," he said, finally. "Why did you run from it, from all of it?" Clara sat down across from him. "Because I could not inherit an empire and live in it with any peace of conscience. Because everything that empire had been built on, some of it, was brilliant, and some of it was cruel, and the money did not differentiate between the two. Because I had spent my entire life being managed and directed and positioned, and my father died and left me more wealth than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, and not a single choice about what to do with any of it." She looked at him. "Because I wanted to find out if I was a person, not an heir, not a position, a person. And then you met me, and then I met you." She held his gaze. "And I fell in love with you before I had any intention of doing so, and I was terrified. Terrified that if you knew, you would look at me the way they looked at me in Philadelphia. Like I was the fortune and the name attached to the fortune. Not just a woman in a boarding house yard with damp hair and a laundry basket," he said. She stopped. He had remembered that. Exactly that. "Yes," she said quietly. "Not just that." The lamp flickered. Outside, something moved in the street. A cat, or the wind, something small and ordinary. Jesse sat with whatever he was sitting with for a very long time. She did not try to fill the silence. She had learned over these months of knowing him that his silences needed to run to their own ends. "I'm angry," he said finally. "I know. I'm angry about the money. Not that you have it, but that you watched me. You watched me killing myself trying to provide, and you knew. You knew you could fix everything we were struggling with, and you said nothing." His voice was rough. "That roof. Those 3 weeks away for the horse-breaking job. You were sewing alterations until your fingers bled." "Yes." "And it didn't seem necessary." "It was necessary," she said firmly. "Not the suffering." "I'm not saying the suffering was necessary, but the earning was. The building was. I needed to know that I could." She paused. "And I needed you to know that what I was building with you was real, not something I had bought." He looked at her. "I feel like a fool." "You're not a fool. You were deceived. By my wife." "Yes." "Who loves me?" he said. It was not quite a question. "Who has loved you since a church social in October?" she said. "Who will love you regardless of what you decide right now, or tomorrow, or whenever you've had time to think?" She held his gaze. "The love was never the lie, Jesse. That was the only real part of any of it." He was very quiet. She stood. "I'm going to make coffee," she said. "And then I'm going to tell you one more thing, and after that, I'll stop talking and let you think." She went to the kitchen and built up the fire and put the coffee on, and she heard him move through the house and settle at the kitchen table. She brought 2 cups and sat across from him. "Dor is here because of the estate," she said. "There are things that legally require my presence, my signature, my decisions. I have been ignoring them by not existing." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "And there is something in my father's estate that requires me to go back to Philadelphia. Something that concerns Daisy." She told him about the provision in the will, the $15,000 set aside for the daughter of George Pruitt, which could only be released by Clara's signature. "My father knew what he had done. He left the provision in the will. I'm not sure whether that makes him better or worse, but it means Daisy has money coming to her, money that is hers by right, and the only way she gets it is if I stop pretending I don't exist." Jesse was looking at her. "I have to go back," she said. "To Philadelphia. To deal with all of it. To sign what needs signing and handle what needs handling." She paused. "And to make sure Daisy gets what she is owed." He was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, "Does she know? About her father? And your father?" "No, not yet." Another silence. "That conversation," he said slowly, "is going to be one of the hardest things you've ever done." "Yes. You're going to do it anyway." It was not quite a question. She heard in it something she was not sure she deserved, something that was not yet forgiveness, but was perhaps related to it. A recognition of something. "Yes," she said. Jesse looked at his coffee, looked at the table, looked at the lamp. "I need time," he said. "To be angry, to think. I can't tell you right now what this means or where it goes." He looked up at her. "But I'm not going to let you go to Philadelphia alone. I'm not whatever I am right now, whatever I need to work through. I'm not a man who lets his wife face something like that without him." Clara felt something move through her that she could not immediately name. Relief was too small a word, and hope felt presumptuous. "Jesse," she said, "you don't have to." "I know I don't have to." His voice was even. "I'm choosing to." He pushed back his chair and stood. "I'm going to sleep. I have work in the morning." He paused at the kitchen doorway. "We'll talk more. When I've had time to." He stopped. "We'll talk more." He went to bed. Clara sat at the kitchen table with her cold coffee and the lamp, and listened to the night, and thought about choices, the ones she had made, and the ones that were still ahead of her, and the ones that would be made for her, if she was not careful. She thought about Daisy. She thought about the conversation that was coming, the one that might cost her the friendship she had not known she needed, until she had it. She thought about Jesse, in the next room, choosing to stay, despite everything, and she held on to that, the way Mei Lin had once held on to one certificate in a kitchen full of burning paper. Just one piece. Just enough. Outside Red Hollow was quiet. The mountains were dark shapes against the sky. The spring night was cool, and the stars were out, and somewhere in a boarding house on 2nd Street, Daisy Pruitt was sleeping, without knowing that the world she would wake up to tomorrow would be different from the one she had gone to sleep in. Clara got up and blew out the lamp and went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time, but eventually she did. Morning came, the way it always came in Montana, without ceremony, without asking permission, the light simply arriving through the ill-fitting windows and laying itself across the floor. Clara had slept 3 hours. She knew this because she had watched the lamp burn down and estimated the darkness afterward. She rose before Jesse built up the kitchen fire and stood at the window while the coffee heated and watched Red Hollow wake itself into another day. The street below was empty, except for one of the miners from the boarding house, walking toward the eastern edge of Vuitton, lunch pail in hand, moving with the contained purposefulness of a man whose day was already decided. She watched him until he disappeared around the corner, and she thought about purpose, about the difference between a day that was decided for you and a day you decided yourself, and how she had spent her whole life learning that difference. She had learned it, and then she had squandered it by being a coward in exactly the ways that mattered most. Jesse appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had dressed already, his face washed, his hair combed. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and they stayed like that for a moment. Two people taking stock of each other across a kitchen table, in a house that smelled like coffee and wood smoke and the accumulated ordinary life they had built. "Coffee's ready," she said. "I can see that." He sat down. She poured. They drank in silence that was not comfortable exactly, but was honest, the silence of two people who were not pretending that everything was fine, who were simply occupying the same space while each carried what they were carrying. He left for the Double H without saying much. At the door, he paused. "I'll be back by midday," he said. "Half day today, I told Harmon yesterday." A pause. "I thought we might talk more, if you're ready." "I'll be here," she said. He nodded. Left. Clara stood in the doorway and watched him ride away, and thought, whatever comes next, I will not lie again. Not by omission, not by silence, not by choosing the wrong moment and calling it mercy. Whatever the cost of honesty, the cost of its absence was higher. She knew that now. She had learned it the hard way, the only way some lessons come. She went to find Daisy. The boarding house kitchen was in the middle of its morning, Daisy at the stove, Mei Lin moving through with the focused efficiency of a woman who had been managing organized chaos for 20 years. Mei Lin looked up when Clara came through the back door, and something passed across her face. Not surprise, but a kind of readiness, the expression of someone who has been waiting. "I need to talk to Daisy," Clara said. Mei Lin looked at Daisy's back, then at Clara. She set down the bowl she was holding and said, "Daisy, take a break. Kitchen's yours for half an hour." Daisy turned with the expression of someone who has been listening to a conversation that kept almost starting and never quite did. She looked at Clara. She looked at Mei Lin's departing back. She dried her hands on her apron. "All right," she said. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table Clara had scrubbed twice the day she was too distracted by Jesse to work properly, the same table where Mei Lin had sat with tea on late evenings and said things that turned out to be true. It was a good table. It had heard a lot. Clara put her hands flat on the surface. She looked at them, the calluses and the small scars, the ring on her left hand, the evidence of the year she had spent becoming someone who worked with her hands. Then she looked up at Daisy. "My real name is Clara Hale," she said. "My father was James Hale. He built railroads." Daisy went very still. "Hale Industries," Clara said. "I know you know the name." The color had left Daisy's face. She was not a woman who hid things easily. Everything moved across her features, quick and readable. And what was moving now was a complicated sequence of recognition and recalculation, and something that was not yet grief, but was adjacent to it. "Tell me," Daisy said. Her voice was level in the particular way of someone working very hard to keep it level. So Clara told her. All of it, the methods Hale Industries had used in the territory's mining operations, the specific sequence of events that had ended George Pruett's operation, the documents she had found after her father's death. She did not soften it. She did not rush past the hard parts. She had promised herself she was done with that. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Daisy sat with her hands in her lap, looking at the table. A long time passed. Clara waited. "He tried everything," Daisy said finally. "My father. He tried to fight it, the takeover, the contracts, the way they changed the terms after the fact. He had a lawyer for a while, but the lawyer cost money, and eventually—" She stopped, started again. "He sold what was left at a loss. We moved twice, and then—" She pressed her lips together. "He died when I was 15. He was 42 years old. The doctor said it was his heart, but She stopped. I know, Clara said quietly. You know. Daisy looked up. There was something in her eyes now. Not hatred, which might have been easier to sit with. Something more complex. Something that was doing the hard work of putting two things together that didn't want to go together. You've known since February. Yes. And you sat at this table with me every Sunday, and you— Daisy stopped, looked away. You brought me your mending. You asked about my week. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Clara sat with the question. It deserved a real answer, not the answer that would make her look better. I was afraid, she said, that you would hate me, that I would lose you. She paused. I know that's not a good enough reason. You had a right to know. My fear was not more important than your right. She looked at Daisy steadily. I am not asking you to forgive me for waiting. I am not asking you to forgive me for any of it. I'm telling you the truth now because it belongs to you, and it's long past time you had it. Daisy was quiet. Then, there's something else. You wouldn't be here just for this. Clara had not expected her to arrive at it so quickly, but Daisy had always been quicker than she appeared. There's a provision in my father's will, Clara said. He knew what he had done. I don't know if knowing made it worse or better. I've been trying to figure that out for a year. But he left $15,000 to the daughter of George Pruitt, to you. She held Daisy's gaze. The provision can only be released with my signature, which I have not given, because I have not been Clara Hale since I arrived here. That money is yours. It has been yours since my father died, and I am going to Philadelphia to sign the papers to release it. Daisy stared at her. $15,000, she said. Yes, because he felt guilty, because he acknowledged a debt. How you understand it, whether it matters, whether it changes anything, whether you want it at all, that is entirely your decision. I am not here to tell you how to feel about any of this. Daisy stood up. She walked to the kitchen window and stood with her back to Clara, looking out at the yard where the laundry lines ran. Clara waited. My father worked that claim for 6 years, Daisy said to the window. 6 years of his life. Before I was born and after. It was going to be, he used to talk about what it would be when it really started producing. A house. Real schooling for me. Maybe passage for my mother's sister to come from Ohio. She was very still. None of it happened. No. And now a number on a piece of paper is supposed to— It's not supposed to do anything, Clara said quietly. It's not a fix. There isn't a fix. It's a debt acknowledged, that's all. What you do with it, whether you take it, whether you use it, whether you burn the bank draft when it arrives, that is yours to decide. A long silence. You said you're going to Philadelphia. Yes. Because of the estate. Because of the estate. And because of the provision. And because— Clara paused. Because I have been running from who I am for a year, and I cannot keep running. I have to go back and face what is there and handle what my father left behind. Not because I want to, because it is mine to handle whether I want it or not. Daisy turned from the window. She looked at Clara, really looked the way people look when they are trying to see something more than just the surface. Are you coming back? She asked. The question surprised Clara. She had not thought of it as a question with an uncertain answer. Yes. With Jesse. I hope so. She held Daisy's gaze. That is not certain. He is very angry. He has every right to be. What happens after Philadelphia? She stopped. I don't know. Daisy looked at her for a long time. I'm angry too, she said. I need you to know that. I'm not going to pretend I'm not. I know. And I need time. To think about all of this. What it means. What I want to do with... She gestured vaguely. With any of it. Take all the time you need. Daisy nodded slowly. Then she said in a different tone, quieter, less armored. Was any of it real, the friendship? The Sundays? Was that... It was the realest thing I had, Clara said, and because she was done with omissions. You were the first friend I'd had since I was 12 years old, who wanted nothing from me. Who was just kind, because that's who you are. It was the realest thing. Daisy looked at the table, at the flower still on her apron from this morning's work. Go to Philadelphia, she said finally. Do what you have to do. She looked up, and then come back, and we'll see. It was not forgiveness. Clara did not expect forgiveness, not yet, maybe, and not for a long time. But it was a door left open, and a door left open was more than she deserved. Thank you, Clara said. She left the kitchen before either of them could find another word to make it worse or better, which would have done neither. She went to see Franklin Dorr. He was in the small sitting room of the boarding house, the room Mei Lin reserved for guests who needed to conduct business with its single good table and its two mismatched but respectable chairs. He was reading papers from his leather case with the patient attention of a man who had learned long ago that waiting was simply a different kind of work. He looked up when she came in and closed the door. I'll return to Philadelphia, she said. She did not sit. But on my terms. He set the papers down. Tell me. Full legal control of the inheritance transferred to me immediately. No trusts, no administrators, no management committees. My father's estate in my name, under my authority, to be directed as I see fit. He considered this. That will require... I know what it will require. Draw up the papers. She moved to the chair across from him and sat, not because she was tired, but because sitting across from someone was different from standing over them, and she was done performing. Second condition. The provision for Daisy Pruitt, George Pruitt's daughter, is to be released within 30 days of my signature, directly to her in her name with no intermediary. Dorr looked at her. You know about the Pruitt provision. I found the file before I left Philadelphia. She held his gaze. My father knew what he had done. He chose that way of acknowledging it. I am choosing to honor it. A pause. That is more than was legally required of you. It is exactly what was morally required of me. The fact that those are different things is part of the problem. Dorr studied her with an expression that was for the first time in their acquaintance something other than assessment. Something that might have been respect, or its first cousin. Third condition, Clara said. You arrange through whatever legal mechanisms are available a legitimate opportunity for a man named Jesse Calloway. He is one of the finest horsemen in the territory. He has a reputation that is his own, built by his own work. I want him to have the kind of start that his reputation has earned. She paused. Not a gift, not charity. A legitimate arrangement, a ranch stake, a partnership. Something real. Something he could have arrived at himself, given time. I am simply removing the time. She watched Dorr's face. It is to come from an independent source. Not from me, not from Hale Industries. A legal fiction if necessary, but one that holds. And he is never to know the origin. Dorr was quiet for a long moment. You want me to construct a benefactor. I want you to correct an imbalance. She met his eyes. He has been working toward something his entire life with exactly the resources available to a man in his position. I have had resources he could not imagine, and I have used none of them which I told myself was principle, and was partly cowardice. I am not giving him my money. I am giving him what his own work has already entitled him to. I'm simply not making him wait another 10 years for it. Dorr picked up his pen, turned it in his fingers. This is highly irregular. You said that before. My answer is the same. Another pause. Then he uncapped his pen. It can be arranged, he said. There are legal structures, a bequest from an unnamed benefactor certified through a Denver law firm that would hold examination. He looked at her. It will take 3 or 4 weeks after we return to Philadelphia. Then we should leave soon. Your husband will accompany you. Clara thought of Jesse that morning. The door. I'll be back by midday. Yes. You seem certain of that, given the circumstances. I am certain of it, she said. He is that kind of man. She was right. She told Jesse that evening all of it, the conditions she had laid out for Dorr, including the arrangement for him. She told him directly, watching his face, not softening it. He was quiet for a long time when she finished. Long enough that she began to hear all the ways he might refuse, the pride, the independence, the particular wound that had been opened when he found out the truth. You arranged something for me, he said. Yes, without asking. I told you about it immediately afterward, which is different from doing it secretly. She paused. I know the distinction is fine. I know you could argue it doesn't matter. But I am trying, Jesse, I am trying to do everything differently. Not perfectly. Differently. He looked at her, those gray eyes moving across her face the way they had that first afternoon in the hardware store wall when she had been covered in dust and scraped, and he had been checking her for damage with the systematic care of a man who did not want to miss anything. You told Daisy, he said. It was not a question she had told him she was going to when he came home at midday. This morning. How did she take it? She was angry. She has every right to be angry. Clara paused. She left the door open. She said, come back and we'll see. That is more than I deserved. Jesse nodded slowly. Then, the arrangement. The ranch stake. What is it exactly? She told him what Dorr had described, the structure, the legal mechanism, the approximate value. She watched him work through it, the pride doing its inevitable battle with the practicality. It would be real, he said. The operation. The work. Completely real. Your reputation is the reason it's credible. Dorr can only construct a legitimate-seeming arrangement because there is a legitimate basis for it. No one who knows your work would find it implausible that someone wanted to invest in you. But it's your money. It's an opportunity, she said. What you do with it is yours. The same way the boarding house was Mei Lin's. She didn't build it with money she earned, waiting tables. She built it from her husband's insurance payment. The origin of the start doesn't determine the quality of what you build from it. He sat with that. I don't love it, he said finally. I know. But I understand it. He looked at her. And I think I understand why you did it the way you did it. Do you? You needed me to not know it was from you. Because if I knew, I would have refused it. A pause. And you needed me to have it. Not for my sake. For yours. She looked at him. For ours. A long silence. I'll come to Philadelphia, he said. I told you I would. He stood moved to the window, stood with his back to her, in the way he did when he was working something through. I'm still angry, Nora. Clara. He stopped. I don't know what to call you. Clara, she said. Please. I'm tired of the other name. He turned. Clara. He said it the way he said things he meant directly without performance. I'm still angry. And I have things to work through that I haven't worked through yet. And I need you to give me time to do that without trying to fix it, or explain it, or manage it. Yes. But I'm not leaving. I'm not whatever I am. I'm not done. He looked at her. We're not done. Clara felt something release in her chest. Not relief entirely. Something bigger and less comfortable than relief. The recognition that the hardest part was not behind them, but ahead, and that they were going to walk into it together anyway. No, she said. We're not done. They left Red Hollow on a Thursday morning in early June. The town had had its opinions in the days between the revelation and the departure. Some people were cool, the Petersons particularly, who had apparently taken it as a personal affront that they had been deceived in their own store. Others were warmer than Clara had expected the old miner Pete, who had never said more than 10 words to her in the entire year, appearing at her door with a jar of preserved plums and a gruff, unpracticed statement that she had been good help at the boarding house, and he hoped things worked out. Sam Archer found her at Peterson's the day before they left. "Things worked out," he said. "Not a question." "Some of them," she said honestly. "We're working on the rest." He nodded. "My sister's in Colorado now," he said. "She wrote me last month. She's doing well." "Good," Clara said. "And then thank you for the warning, for all of it." Archer shrugged with the discomfort of a man for whom gratitude is physically uncomfortable. She recognized it. She had seen it before in a different face. "Do one thing for me," he said. "What? When you get back, build something worth coming back to." He picked up his hat. "This town could use a few more people who know what things are actually worth." He left. Clara stood in the store for a moment, holding her jar of coffee and her list of supplies, and thought about what it meant to know what things were worth the specific education of a year, spent without the resources that had always stood between her and the actual cost of things. She knew what flour cost now. She knew what a roof repair cost. She knew what it cost to heat a small house through a Montana winter, and what it cost to feed 2 people on ranch wages, and sewing money, and what it cost, in specific and unmistakable terms, to build trust back after you had broken it. She knew those things now. She would not forget them. Mei Lin hugged her at the boarding house door. Not a brief, formal hug, a real one, arms fully committed, the kind given by someone who did not give them often, and therefore meant more when they did. Clara held on. "You'll be all right," Mei Lin said against her shoulder. "I don't know that." "No, but you'll be all right anyway." She pulled back. Her dark eyes were very steady. "Right when you arrive. I want to know you got there." "I will." Mei Lin looked at Jesse, who was loading the last of their bags onto the wagon. She looked at him the way she had looked at things she was assessing from the first day Clara had known her, completely quickly, without missing anything. "Take care of each other," she said. It was addressed to both of them. "We will," Jesse said. He had come to stand beside Clara. He said it without hesitation, and Clara heard in it something that had not been there 3 days ago. Not forgiveness, yet, but decision. The decision of a man who has assessed a situation and chosen his position. Daisy appeared in the doorway behind Mei Lin. She stood there for a moment, her hands in her apron pockets, her expression complicated in the way of someone who has been doing hard internal work and has arrived at a place that is not resolution, but is something more sustainable than where they started. "Write to me too," she said to Clara. "When you get there." Clara looked at her. "I will." "And when you come back." Daisy stopped, started again. "When you come back, we should eat together. You and Jesse and Mei Lin and me. Somewhere that isn't this kitchen." She paused. "I haven't decided whether I'm going to take the money yet. But I'd like to talk to you about my father. What you know about him. The man he was before." Her voice was careful. "Not the end of his story. The rest of it." Clara's throat tightened. "I would like that very much." Daisy nodded once and went back inside. Mei Lin gave Clara one final look, the particular look that contained everything the older woman knew and had chosen not to say, and would trust Clara to figure out on her own, and followed her. Jesse helped Clara up to the wagon bench. He climbed up beside her. He took the reins. Red Hollow arranged itself behind them as they went the boarding house. The general store, the church, the saloons, the blacksmiths. All of it, settling into the particular angle that things take when you are leaving them slightly more present than usual, slightly more vivid. Clara did not look back until they rounded the bend at the edge of town. Then she turned and looked. It was early morning, and the light was the low, clear gold of a June dawn, and the mountains behind the town were the dark blue of deep water, and the whole scene held the specific beauty of things you are leaving and therefore seeing truly for the first time. She turned back around. Jesse said nothing. The horses moved at their steady pace. The road opened ahead of them. After a while, she said, "Tell me something." "What? Something true. Something I don't know yet." He was quiet for a moment. The wagon moved through the morning. "I was more afraid," he said slowly, "of you leaving than of anything else you told me." She looked at him. "The money, the name, all of it. I was angry, and I needed to be angry. And I'll probably be angry again before this is settled." He kept his eyes on the road. "But underneath all of that, the thing that scared me most was the idea that you would leave, go back to Philadelphia and become that person again, the one in the newspaper photograph, and Red Hollow would be something you'd done for a year and moved on from." He paused. "I could be angry about the lie. I couldn't have handled losing you." Clara looked at the road ahead of them, at the mountains, at the sky. "I burned the deeds," she said, "the night before we were married. I fed them into the stove one by one until there was nothing left. I know. Mei Lin told me. I kept one bank certificate. I know that, too. I did it because—" She stopped. "I needed to know that I was choosing you without the safety net, that it was real, that I wasn't holding on to a door I could walk back through. And the one you kept, insurance," she said. "Mei Lin's word, in case of emergency." He was quiet. "There's going to be an emergency," she said. "Not now. Not soon, maybe. But eventually the ranch or something else. Something we haven't thought of yet. And when it comes, the money will be there. And it will be available to us because I kept that one certificate." She looked at him. "And I am telling you that now, clearly, so that there is no future moment when you find out about it and have to decide whether it was another secret." Jesse looked at her. He held her gaze for a moment in the way he did when he was deciding something. "Thank you," he said. 2 words, but the right 2 words in the right order. Philadelphia was everything Clara had remembered, and nothing she recognized. She had lived here for 24 years. She had attended parties in these rooms, had walked these streets, had known these houses as intimately as she knew her own reflection. The city had not changed. She had. The Hale mansion stood at the end of its street, with the composed self-assurance of buildings that have been maintained by people paid to maintain them, regardless of whether anyone is living inside. The staff was still there, the housekeeper Mrs. Daniels, the cook, the groundsmen. They greeted Clara with a relief so genuine that it moved her, and she understood for the first time that her absence had been unkind to people who had no part in the circumstances that had prompted it. "Mrs. Daniels," she said, "I'm sorry for worrying you. I should have found a way to let you know I was safe." Mrs. Daniels pressed her lips together in the expression of a woman who has a great deal to say, and is choosing to say none of it. "You're here now, Miss Clara." Then she looked at Jesse standing in the entrance hall, with his hat in his hands, looking at the crystal chandelier with the expression of a man assessing an alien landscape. "And you've brought your husband. Welcome, Mr. Calloway." Jesse looked at the chandelier, at the oil painting covering most of one wall, at the marble floor. "This is where you grew up," he said to Clara. "Yes. It's—" He stopped. "I know. I was going to say it's very large. That too." He looked at her. Something moved in his expression, not the anger which was still present in its working through itself way, but something else. A recalibration, You gave this up, he said, for 50 cents a day and a roof that leaked. I gave it up, she said, for a life that was mine. The 50 cents and the roof were part of the package. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at the chandelier. You were very brave, he said. It sounded like it surprised him. I was very desperate, she said. Those can look alike from the outside. The legal work took 3 weeks. Door's firm had prepared the documentation. Clara worked through it with her lawyers, men who had managed the Hale estate for 20 years, and who had to their considerable credit maintained the businesses with reasonable competence in her absence, while making clear through the language of their letters that they found the whole situation irregular. She signed what needed signing. She authorized what needed authorizing. She directed the release of the Pruitt provision and watched the bank draft prepared $15,000 payable to Daisy Pruitt, Red Hollow, Montana territory, and felt something settle in her that had been unsettled for a very long time. The arrangement for Jesse was managed through Door's connections to a Denver law firm and certified through the mechanism of a fictional bequest from a fictional Colorado rancher, legal technical airtight. Clara reviewed the documents, found them sound, and signed the authorization, without letting herself think too much about whether Jesse would eventually figure it out, which she suspected he probably would, and whether he would be able to forgive it, which she suspected he eventually would be, because she was beginning to understand that he was a man whose anger burned clean rather than the kind that smoldered. Jesse came with her to the lawyers the second day. He sat in the corner of the room and watched the proceedings with the precise attention of a man who does not fully understand the language being spoken, but is learning it as he goes. At one point, one of the lawyers, a man of 60 who had been doing this work since before Clara was born, and who conducted himself accordingly, made a remark that seemed in context to suggest that the ranch investment had represented an error in judgment on Clara's part. Jesse looked up from the corner. The ranch, he said in the calm, direct way he said things, cleared $200 in its first 6 months on horses alone. By spring it'll be $400. The cattle are up. The sheep operation is breaking even. He met the lawyer's eyes. I'd define that as a sound investment. The lawyer looked at him, looked at Clara. Clara kept her expression neutral. Indeed, the lawyer said. Jesse went back to observing. That evening, back at the house, Clara found him in the library, the room her father had used as an office, walled with books smelling of old leather and paper. He was standing in front of the shelves with his hands behind his back, reading titles. You didn't have to do that, she said, with the lawyer. He was wrong, Jesse said. He was wrong about the investment, and he was speaking as though you weren't in the room. He pulled a book from the shelf, looked at the spine, put it back. I don't have much to offer in a room like that, but I know what I know. Clara stood in the doorway of her father's library and looked at this man, this calloused, careful, honest man who had grown up with nothing and had made himself into something real, standing among her father's books, as if he belonged there, which he did because he was hers, and this was hers. And the distinction between the two worlds had always been more permeable than she had believed. Jesse, she said. He turned. I love you, she said. I loved you when you came to the boarding house yard to check if I was all right. I loved you at the church social when you caught me falling out of a reel. I loved you the night the roof leaked and you sat on the bed with your face in your hands because you wanted to give me something better than you had. She held his gaze. None of it was about the money. I know you know that, but I need you to hear me say it plainly without anything else in the way. He looked at her for a long time. Then he crossed the library and put his hands on her face. Those calloused hands she had loved since the first moment she understood what they had built for themselves, and held her face and looked at her. I know, he said. I've known for a while. A pause. I was angry. I'm still working through the edges of it. But I've known. He brushed his thumb along her cheekbone. "You came back for me that night in the kitchen. You sat there and told me the whole truth, and let me be angry without trying to manage my reaction. That was—" He stopped, started again. "I've had very few people in my life who let me be what I actually was instead of what they needed me to be. You did that, even when it cost you." Clara felt her eyes fill. "Don't cry," he said. "I'm not," she said, which was technically false. "You are." But his voice was different now, the warmth back in it, the particular wry warmth she had fallen in love with. "I'm allowed to," she said. "It's been a long year." He pulled her in. She pressed her face against his chest and felt the solid warmth of him, and outside the Philadelphia night moved through its paces the carriages and the gas lamps and the particular sounds of a city that had never known her the way a small Montana town had come to know her, and none of it mattered at all. They went back to Red Hollow first on the way west. Not because they had to, they could have gone directly to Colorado where the ranch waited. But Clara needed to close something, or open it properly. She was not sure which. Daisy met them at the boarding house. She had received the bank draft Door's office had sent it ahead as arranged. She was sitting in the kitchen when Clara and Jesse arrived the draft on the table in front of her, May Lynn beside her. Clara sat down across from her. Jesse took a chair by the wall. "I haven't decided yet," Daisy said. "About the money." "You don't have to decide now." "I know." Daisy looked at the draft. "I've been thinking about what you said, about it being a debt acknowledged." She smoothed the paper with one finger. "My father wasn't just a victim. He was a person. He had a whole life before the claim and before all of it." She looked up. "I want to know about that. About him. What you read in those files." "The files had documents," Clara said carefully. "Business records. There was a photograph your father with his men at the claim the year before." She paused. He looked proud. In the photograph. Not arrogant, the other kind. The kind that comes from building something. Daisy was quiet. "He deserved better," Clara said. "From the world he lived in, from the people who had more power than he did from all of it. He deserved better. And I am deeply sorry not on my father's behalf because that's not mine to give, but on my own behalf for the months of knowing and saying nothing. For sitting at this table with you." Daisy looked at the draft. "I'm going to take it," she said. "Not because I've forgiven your father, but because my father worked for it, and taking it is honoring that." She looked up. "I'm going to use it to start something. I don't know what yet, but something that's mine." "Good," Clara said. They sat in May Lynn's kitchen for another hour, the four of them, the way they had sat dozens of times over the past year, except that now everything was in the open, and the table felt different for it. Not lighter, exactly. More honest. There is a weight to honesty, too, but it is a weight you can build with unlike the other kind. May Lynn brought tea she had not been asked to make because she was May Lynn. Jesse talked to Daisy about horses, an unlikely subject that nonetheless carried them through a half hour of genuine conversation because Daisy had grown up around working animals and had opinions, and Jesse respected opinions about animals. Clara watched them and felt something that she realized after a moment was gratitude for the specific accident of character that had made Daisy Pruitt, for the generosity of a person who had every reason to close a door and had chosen not to. When they stood to leave, Daisy hugged Clara. Not a brief, uncertain hug, a real one. "Come back," Daisy said. "We will," Clara said. The road to Colorado took 10 days. They traveled slowly not because they had to, but because the particular quality of the time seemed to call for slowness. They had been moving fast toward things, away from things for so long, that the stillness of the road, the rhythm of the horses, the necessity of simply covering ground without anything required of them beyond covering, It felt like something they needed. They camped each night under open sky, cooked over fire, talked more than they had in months. The real kind of talking. The kind that happened when there was no town. No obligation. No one else's schedule to accommodate. She told him the full story of her father. Not the sanitized version. Not the version that would make her easier to sympathize with. The whole man. The brilliance and the ruthlessness, and the moments of genuine tenderness that had made losing him complicated in ways she was still untangling. "He taught me to read contracts," she said one evening firelight between them. "I was 10 years old, and he sat me down with a land purchase agreement and walked me through it line by line. He said a person who can't read the terms of a deal has no business making one." She looked at the fire. He meant it as a practical lesson. It was also the best thing he ever did for me. "Because you used it." Because I used it. In Philadelphia, in Red Hollow, May Lynn's legal trouble reading Door's documents, knowing what I was signing, and what I was refusing to sign. She paused. He gave me tools I used to walk away from everything he built. I'm not sure what he would have thought about that. What do you think he would have thought? She considered it honestly. Angry at first, and then maybe proud. He valued people who could hold their own. She looked at Jesse. He would have liked you. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it to be kind. He valued men who did what they said they were going to do and didn't make excuses about it. She held his gaze. That's you. That has always been you. Jesse was quiet for a moment. Then, my father was a different kind of man. Tell me. He told her the real story, the one he had given her in pieces, and now gave her whole. The Texas ranch, which had been small and hard, and full of the specific love of people who don't have much beyond each other. The fever that took his mother first, and his father 3 weeks after, because some griefs work faster than others. The days after 16 years old, responsible for nothing and no one but himself, which was freedom and catastrophe simultaneously. I thought about going back east once, he said. There was a man who came through where I was working businessman from Chicago. He offered me work as a hand on his property back east. Said he'd seen me with horses and wanted someone reliable. He shook his head. I don't know why I didn't take it. It would have been more money, more stable. You would have hated it. I would have. He looked at the fire. I needed to be where things were open, where you could see the horizon. A pause. I think that's why I never left the territory, even when the work was harder elsewhere. You give something up when you can't see the horizon. Clara thought about the Hale mansion, the city pressing in on all sides. Every window looking at another building, the sky a narrow stripe overhead, if you looked straight up. She thought about Red Hollow with the mountains surrounding it, and the valley spreading outward, and the sky enormous overhead. I understand that now, she said. I know you do. He looked at her across the fire. That's one of the things even when I was angry, even at the worst of it, I knew that you understood that. That it wasn't that you hadn't come out here to play at something. You came because you needed the same thing I'd always needed. To see the horizon. Yes. They sat with the fire for a long time, the night settling around them, the horses quiet on their picket line. Then Jesse said, What are we going to do with the money? Clara looked at him. It was the first time he had asked about it as a shared question. Not the money that was hers, but the money that was theirs, a thing to be considered together. Some of it, she said carefully, should stay where it is. In the banks, for emergencies. Agreed. The ranch should operate on what the ranch earns. Your stake the Duran's Warish Eli Marsh's operation that should stand on its own. Agreed. But, she paused, there are things that money can do that aren't about us. Schools, medical care, the nearest town to the ranch. Copper Ridge, he said. Copper Ridge has no doctor. He was quiet. It's close enough that if something happened to you, he said, or to anyone on the ranch. Yes. He looked at the fire. What would that take? Building and equipment. A salary for a doctor willing to come out. Not enormous in the context of what's available. Another pause. Then, the school first. She looked at him. If there's going to be a ranch, he said, there'll be families eventually. Children. They'll need schooling. He met her eyes. The school first, then the medical question. We decide together when the time comes, what else. But we agree on those two. Yes, she said. Those two. He nodded, looked back at the fire, then quietly. I'm glad you kept the certificate. She looked at him. I said I wasn't. At the time. He kept his eyes on the fire. I was wrong. Mei Lin was right. You were right. A pause. It's not weakness to have a safety net. It's just not having one when you need one is a different kind of pride than the kind worth keeping. Clara said nothing. She let the words settle where they needed to settle. After a while, Jesse reached across the space between them and took her hand. They sat that way until the fire burned low, two people in the dark of a Montana road holding on. The ranch came into view on a golden afternoon in late September. The land first wide and various folded into a valley between two ridges, a river making its way through the middle with the casual confidence of water that knows it belongs where it is. Then the buildings rough-weathered, visible from the road, as a cluster of functionality rather than elegance. The main house, the barn. Two outbuildings, the corrals that Jesse had described in detail on the ride from Red Hollow, and which she now saw were indeed properly built, solid enough to handle what they were for. Jack and Cole Duran came out to meet them. Eli Marsh emerged from the barn with the expression of a man who had been hoping they would arrive before dark. About time, Jack said, shaking Jesse's hand, with the energy of someone who has been holding down a situation and is glad to have more hands. Any trouble while we were gone? Jesse asked. The north fence needs work. The gray mare threw a shoe and we couldn't find the farrier until Wednesday. Eli's sheep got into Cole's hay twice and they are not speaking. We're speaking, Cole said. We're speaking plenty. They're speaking about the sheep, at volume. Jack looked at Clara. Mrs. Calloway, good to have you here. Good to be here, she said, and meant it in the specific way she had come to mean things, not as a pleasantry, not as performance, but because it was true. That evening, the five of them ate together at the long kitchen table. The food rough, the conversation ranging across everything the Durans and Eli had been managing the plans for the coming season. The horses Jesse wanted to look at in the morning. Eli's measured argument for expanding the sheep operation that Cole received with the expression of a man keeping his opinions to himself through an act of will. Clara cooked the meal. It was not perfect. The stove was different from every other stove she had learned, and she misjudged the heat on the beans, but it was edible and hot and made with the specific competence of someone who had learned by doing and kept doing until the doing got better. Good beans, Eli said. They're a little under-seasoned. Little under-seasoned beats no beans. After dinner, when the dishes were done, and the Durans and Eli had gone to their respective quarters, Clara and Jesse stood on the porch of the main house and looked out at the ranch in the settling dark. The valley was going purple and gray. Stars were beginning. Somewhere in the barn, the horses were quiet, and from the north field came the occasional sound of Eli's sheep, whom nobody could make be entirely silent, and who seemed to feel no obligation to try. What do you want to call it? Jesse asked. She looked at the land. She thought about names, the names she had been, the names she had given herself, the names that had been given to her. She thought about Red Hollow and Mei Lin's kitchen, and the boarding house yard with the laundry lines, and the little house with the leaking roof. She thought about Philadelphia and the library and her father's face and the things she had burned and the one thing she had kept. "Second Chance Ranch," she said. Jesse looked at her. "Because that's what it is," she said. "For all of us. Every person on this property came here because they needed something to start over with, including us." She looked at him. "Especially us." He was quiet for a moment. "Second Chance Ranch," he said. He let it sit. "Yes." He put his arm around her, and she leaned into him, and they stood looking at what they had decided to build. "That's what it is." The winter that year was hard, the kind of Montana-adjacent winter that the territory produced with particular severity every few years, as if to remind everyone that the land had opinions and the people were guests. The ranch held. The horses, Jesse's primary operation, the thing he was building the ranch's early reputation on, were ready for spring market when spring came, properly broke and sound, and exactly what buyers needed. The Duran brothers lost 3 head of cattle to a late storm in March and replaced them from their own reserves, which they had maintained for exactly such circumstances, demonstrating the kind of practical foresight that Clara had come to understand was the real difference between operations that lasted and operations that did not. Eli's sheep were infuriating and profitable in equal measure. Clara managed the house and the accounts. She had a facility with numbers that she had never had occasion to apply before this, and which turned out to be one of the more useful inheritances her father had left her. Not money, but method, the trained ability to look at a set of figures and understand what they were actually saying. She kept the ranch's books with a precision that the Duran brothers found slightly intimidating, and Jesse found both useful and characteristic. She wrote letters. To Mei Lin every 2 weeks, long letters detailed full of the ranch and the season, and the small events of a life lived in a valley. Mei Lin's letters back were shorter and more pointed observations about Red Hollow's continuing development and the boarding house, and Daisy, who was, according to Mei Lin's careful language, doing well, and had decided on her endeavor. From Daisy herself, a letter in late November. She had used the money, not all of it, but a substantial portion to purchase a small building on Red Hollow's main street adjacent to the general store. She was opening a supply operation. Seeds, tools, household goods, the practical necessities of frontier life sold by someone who understood what frontier life actually required. I told Mei Lin it was because there was a gap in the market, Daisy wrote. Which is true. But the real reason is that my father spent 6 years building something that should have been his, and wasn't. I'm building something that is going to be mine, and I want it to be something he would have been proud of. A woman running a serious supply operation in a silver mining town is not nothing. It is, in fact, something. Clara read the letter twice, then she wrote back. She wrote, "It is something. It is quite a lot, actually. I think your father would have thought so too." Spring came, and with it the particular resurrection that spring performed on the ranch, the snow pulling back from the south-facing slopes first, then the valley, then the north ridges last of all. The river ran high and fast from the melt. The horses in the corrals grew animated with the change in air. And in April, Clara understood that she was carrying a child. She told Jesse on a Tuesday evening in the kitchen after dinner with the particular directness she had adopted as policy since Philadelphia. He went very still. Then he looked at her with an expression that she had not seen on him before, not the controlled composure or the working through something look, or even the unguarded happiness of the Christmas proposal. Something older and deeper and slightly undone. "When?" he managed. "October, I think. The doctor in Copper Ridge will need to confirm." He sat down. "Jesse, I'm fine." And he was clearly not entirely fine in the ordinary sense, but the not fine was not distress. It was the particular overwhelmed quality of a man receiving news that is too large for the moment it arrives in. He stopped. I don't know how to be a father. Neither do I know how to be a mother. We'll figure it out the way we've figured everything else out. He looked at her. Together. Together. He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and crossed the kitchen and put his arms around her carefully, as if she had become newly and precisely valuable. I'm terrified, he said against her hair. I know. But I'm Clara. He stopped. Could not find the word, apparently. She felt him search for it, and not find it, and decide it didn't matter. I know, she said. She did know. She was terrified too, and underneath the terror something so enormous she could not look at it directly. Something she had been circling for a year, getting closer by degrees, that felt like the opposite of all the running she had done. Something that felt like arriving. On a warm evening in May, exactly 1 year after the carriage had appeared on Red Hollow's main street, and the world she had been carefully constructing had begun to fall apart, Clara sat on the porch of the Second Chance Ranch and watched the sun go down behind the western ridge. Jesse was in the corral, working with a young horse moving through the patient patterns of early training that she had watched him do 100 times. He moved the way he always moved with horses, unhurried, entirely present the center of a small world of attention and trust that he built one careful day at a time. The mountains were going gold, and then orange, and then a deep rose that she had not known was possible before she came west. She thought about the deeds she had burned, the life she had fed into a stove in the dark of a Montana winter, and watched become ash. She thought about what had been lost in that fire, the easy access, the certainty, the particular safety of wealth that existed, whether you did anything or not, and what had been kept. The certificate, the one piece. She had not burned everything. She had kept one piece because Mei Lin was wise, and because survival and wisdom sometimes look similar, and because there had come a day when that certificate was exactly what was needed. The day would come again. That was the nature of life. Things broke and needed fixing. Things went wrong. Children arrived and got sick and needed doctors who needed building and staffing. Schools needed money. Operations needed investment at the wrong moment. The world had its crises, and they were not always politely scheduled. She would be ready for them. That was not cowardice. That was the other kind of thing, the thing that looked like cowardice from the outside, and was something else entirely from the inside. The willingness to hold one thing back, not because you were afraid of committing, but because you understood that commitment did not require the destruction of everything that could sustain it. Jesse came out of the corral, latching the gate with the automatic precision of long habit, and walked toward the porch. He had seen her when he came out, and lifted his chin in the small acknowledgement she had come to love the gesture that meant, I see you. I'll be there. Give me a moment. And now he climbed the porch steps and sat in the chair beside her. Good session, she asked. Getting there. She's smart, that's the problem, and the solution both. Smart horses figure out what you want faster, but they also figure out what they can get away with. Sounds like someone else I know. He looked at her sideways. I'm choosing not to respond to that. Wise. They sat. The mountains went from rose to purple to the particular dark blue that preceded full dark. The first stars appeared. After a while, Jesse said, Do you miss it, Philadelphia? She thought about it honestly the way she thought about hard questions now, without the first available answer. I miss Mrs. Daniels, she said, and the library, and the particular smell of the house in winter when all the fires were going. She paused. But those are things. I don't miss being that person. I don't miss the life that was decided for me before I had any say in it. He nodded. Do you miss Texas? She asked. Sometimes. He was quiet for a moment. The particular flatness of it, the way you could see everything coming from a long way off. A pause. But Montana, does something Texas doesn't. The mountains, there's something about being surrounded by things bigger than you that I didn't know I needed until I had it. A sense of scale. Yes. He looked at the darkening ridges. Reminds you what's actually large and what just seems large. Clara thought of a mansion in Philadelphia that had seemed very large once. I'm glad you never went back east, she said. So am I. I'm glad you came to Red Hollow. He looked at her. Red Hollow came with consequences. The best ones. He reached over and took her hand. They sat that way as the dark came fully in 2 people at the end of a day on a ranch they had named for second chances, holding on in the particular way of people who have learned through considerable education what is worth holding on to. Inside the lamp was lit, the kitchen was warm, and somewhere in the distance, Eli Marsh's sheep were making their considered opinions known to the night. The mountains were dark. The stars were out. The valley breathed. This was what she had burned the deeds for. Not the poverty, and not the leaking roof, and not the sewing money, and not any particular hardship. She had burned them for this, for the right to sit on a porch at the end of a day and know that everything around her was real, earned, chosen, hers, not by inheritance, by decision. That was the difference, and it was everything.